Yes, that was the, well, Dale, since you're standing, would you like to lead us in the pledge to the flag?
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, welcome. Holy mackerel, we got a full house here. At least at least here, not there. Yep.
Board Member Ulrich. Vice Chair Farmer.
Here.
Board Chair Daddy.
Here.
Board Member Quillisi.
Here.
Board Member Hanson. Here. All present.
Okay, members of the public wishing to address the Planning Commission, actually, it's not supposed to say that. It is supposed to say Ojai Board of Appeals. On items appearing on the agenda are requested to complete a speaker's card and file it with the secretary prior to the start of the meeting. Cards are available in the lobby. Speakers should state their name and address for the record and limit your contents to 3 minutes or less. Comments must be directed to the board, not the audience. While the Building Appeals Board is in session, all in attendance are expected to maintain order and decorum and to obey the order of the chair. I have a speaker's card from Council Wyrick on public comment. I'd like you to set the timer on that clock to about 7:30.
No,
That's what I'd really like you to do.
I'll tell you what, set the timer, it's fine with me. I can ask the chair for his indulgence for more time. It's his meeting, not mine. Okay, I wanted to express a concern about the hedges safety issue. And I was, frankly, let me get to the microphone, sorry. I wanted to express a concern about the hedges issue. If you recall, council gave direction quite a while ago, months ago, about when we were dealing with the whole fences and hedges issue, about we gave one direction, and that was on the safety matter. I've expressed this concern to the Planning Commission. I wanted to express it to this board tonight, because I was disappointed that it was not on the agenda for discussion tonight, given that the council was asked about direction at last Tuesday night's meeting, and we gave direction to go ahead and solicit your input on this, and you meet so irregularly, and I was kind of disappointed that it wasn't on the agenda, given that we gave that direction a week ago, and I know that the chair had requested that this be on the agenda, and that's what provoked asking council for direction. So I was disappointed to see that. But I was also disappointed further back, and I've shared this with the city manager, that a draft memorandum was circulated to the council back in at the end of April, incorporating and giving council the impression. The council gave positive input to this. Good protocol, proceed with it. And the reaction I got when I asked about how many enforcement actions were following council direction, following this months ago, was nothing. And that concerned me. And I wanted to draw your attention to the pictures of obvious traffic hazards that we have today that are right on the corner of various streets. And the reason I am getting kind of aggressive in stating this is I don't want this on my conscience if some kid gets killed at an intersection, especially after the council has given direction to address these safety hazards, and apparently staff is not addressing them. We have a very well-defined traffic visibility definition in the code that I handed out, and obviously, if you see by these pictures, those are completely egregious violations of the traffic visibility definition that's in our code. Obviously, not able to see oncoming traffic or a kid riding a bike, and some of those are not two-way stop situations. And what concerned me was that the feedback I got from staff is they were worried about how to define what a proper visibility corner would be, which also concerned me, and I expressed this concern to the city manager because it's defined in the code what the traffic visibility triangle is. So what's the debate? Let's use some common sense here. And it seems to me that the council has given direction. I expressed this concern to the Planning Commission. We have some, that we were supposed to address dangerous situations. I think we have some dangerous situations. It's been many months, and I don't think any of these dangerous situations, obvious dangerous situations, have been addressed. And I wanted to bring that concern to you, and please, if you have to get this on a future agenda, discuss it. The council wants input from Planning Commission, Building Appeals Board, everybody, to first address the safety issues and then move on to what we do about our code that we've chosen to only enforce selectively with respect to obvious traffic hazards and not to other issues so far. Thank you.
Would you remain, and would you turn off that light? Thank you. I have some questions. I'm not really sure. We're not going to discuss this. I'm
bringing it as a concern, that's all.
I have it. I'm going to ask a couple questions because I have some concerns myself. This notification has been sitting on my desk for a number of months. Public hearing on the 28th, memorandum, certain fences, walls, and hedges. One of the questions I want to ask is where this stands today, because I'm not going to make an assumption, I'm going to ask the question. I thought that council brought this up. It was then discussed, and it was determined that this was not going to be enforced at this time. So I need somebody to refresh me on
Yeah, we gave
what that
direction
was.
that we did not want a total enforcement of the existing code. People felt it needed to be reviewed. Things like, for example, people with 6-foot fences across their front yards and what a frontage is and all that kind of issue. So what we did was we said, look, we're not going to enforce the general code right now. That's what pending more input from commissions and boards and staff, and they're going to study this. What we are going to do is to address immediate safety issues. And that was the purpose for the draft memorandum that Mr. Clark issued on April 29th, 2015. That incorporated the council direction.
Okay, I believe I'm the oldest standing member, I guess, of Complete Streets, and we went ahead a number of years ago and listed, when we did our city walkthrough and our Complete Streets evaluation, and we listed a number of intersections that were highly dangerous.
Yes.
And needed some attention, so.
The ones in that picture from me riding a bike around the village.
Well,
I'm sure there's more.
And I'd like to go a little further, and then I'm going to move on to the minutes.
But I'm just saying that I think it's a concern to me as an individual council person when council gives direction and then there's no evidence that it's being followed.
I have a concern that we have intersections where we've had injury accidents recently.
Yes.
And I guess the question I don't know, and I don't know who to ask, is do we actually have our city risk manager go out and take a look and see what could have been done to avoid a bicycle hit in a crosswalk and then a motorcycle down within the last couple months? And I'm talking about the same small street, very short street. And so what I'm wondering is it just appears that we're into repeat hits. And then I'm going to stop it, and then we can carry on this conversation at a different time, because unless, Mr. Summers, you'd like to add to that?
I was going to point out that I'm not sure the city's risk manager runs that analysis, but as a general matter, there's a few different ways in which the city would be immune from liability for that lawsuit because the hazard exists on the property owner's property, and the city is generally immune from failing to enforce its own codes. That said, I understand the clear direction from council is to look at these, and I think staff understands that, and I expect that that'll move forward. And I'll turn this over.
Liability would be the furthest thing from my mind, going down on a motorcycle because we've got a tough intersections. The road rash is just tough. Mr. Clark, did you have something?
Sure. A couple things. First of all, my understanding of the council direction regarding fences, walls, and hedges was that they, when they discussed their goals at the last city council meeting, was that they approved my recommendation, which is that the BAB and Planning Commission and HPC get involved through the neighborhood planning process. So if there was, if there was a council intent that this be on tonight's agenda, then I misunderstood what happened, and I apologize. But my understanding at the time, at least what I was hearing, was that the council agreed with that direction. Secondly, as far as the draft memorandum that Councilman Member Wyrick circulated, he's correct. Initially, there was some question in our mind as to how to enforce it, and when he made contact with me some months ago, we had not gone after any hedges. I did subsequently tell the Community Development Department to follow this memorandum, and we've looked, and I think Mr. Stewart's given you a rundown of what's been done. But I guess the final comment is that I really think that this is an issue that belongs on a city council agenda, and so I will go ahead and put it on a city council agenda and make sure that I get clear direction from the city council on how they want to handle this and other code enforcement matters.
Okay, and would it be helpful if Complete Streets went ahead and found that few-year-old hazardous intersection? I think it was a map that we actually did.
That would be very helpful.
And present that back, and then maybe they'll correspond with some of the pictures and some other things that can happen with some recommendation. We did do a pretty extensive set of recommendations, and I do know we have some other issues because I've heard from two different areas. One is the zoning, which is certainly the planning, and I would hope that we could maybe have, I don't know how this works with the Brown Act, but I would certainly hope that we could have some commissioners meet, even if we have to go through Complete Streets to show up. I know that HPC is looking for a change as far as the walls, and I'm going to let that go. Yes, Mr. Wyrick.
I'm just going to take issue with Mr. Clark. I got to tell you, as an individual council person, I'm frustrated when I feel we've given clear direction. We're given a response from the city manager that that's the direction we're going to go. And now the discussion is to go back to the city council for more direction after we've given direction. I'm frustrated with that.
Thank you. Commissioner Germello, would you like to?
Germello?
Did I get it wrong?
You butchered it.
Huh?
You butchered it.
Okay, lay it out there.
Jagiello, okay?
Jagiello.
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 Okay.
Chester. Well, there's not much to report. Last week was it was last week was a light week for us. We had one DRP come before us for a rebuild of an existing house that was burnt down. It was a simple matter, except for the fact that we got this memo at the 11th hour by Mr. Clark stating that we should consider moving it forward pending some type of resolution with, I think it's AB 54 and the Native American what do you call it? Archaeological, ordinances, and we took issue with it, with getting that memo at the 11th hour, and which requested that we pretty much put a stop on all. What was the term that you used? But the situation was this. A moratorium was being requested on all building well, it appeared to us that a moratorium needed to be requested on all projects in order to stop what we were doing, and prevent the approval of any project in the city of Ojai pending this new legislation or this new ordinance that was in the middle of being created. So it was kind of an odd request for us, and we are now so we passed the DRP, we passed the resolution, so they're moving forward, but we found it kind of disconcerting that there's there's some type of plan being fabricated with the Native American group. I don't even know what you would call them. Do they have a name?
The
The-
Arboreno Ventureno Band of Mission Indians is the formal name.
Okay. And some of those issues that are being discussed have a direct impact on all permits being issued. So, and yet there's no representation involved in the discussion that we know of from the either the Building Appeals Board or the Planning Commission to look at those issues and what they might be and how they may affect all the ordinances from here on out. So we find that that was an interesting situation that went about. The other thing that happened that night was that we got a presentation from the city on the recreation department, on the park, the new playground that they're doing, which we all thought was a great idea. Another issue that we talked about was bringing up the second dwelling ordinance for review. We all felt that it's time to look at that ordinance to discuss whether or not it needs to be changed. There's a lot of, I'd say, people who think that it needs to be adjusted since we did all that work on the compliance program. Well, thank you all for doing that. You did a great job. And I agreed with a lot of that. Some of the issues with the second dwelling compliance program that we see that could be modified that might improve the situation is a couple of items is increasing the square footage that's currently 670 square feet to 1,200 square feet. And to also allow for variances to be considered for approval for second dwellings. This impacts not only, this ordinance impacts the low-income housing conversation that's going about. It's also impacting, I believe, the VRBO conversation and the rental by owner. So those are the two, those are the issues there. Is there any questions that you might have for me?
Well, hey, thank you for doing that. Thank you for showing up. And I guess one of the questions I'll ask, and again, we need to move along to this agenda, is if you have any planning commissioners that would have the time to come to the next Complete Streets meeting. I believe we're exempt.
Don't we have representation?
You do, but I believe that body is exempt from having more people because we're already noticed, we're already published. And since we're a regularly held, designated calendared meeting, we can have more than a couple of planning commissioners there.
And those meetings are open to the public?
They're advertised to the public in the paper, they're regularly scheduled, and they've been open to the public for 3.5 years.
I've attended as a private citizen.
Yeah, then I think you can have
As many
extra
as I'd like,
commissioners.
correct?
And yeah, the trick, of course, is that the commissions couldn't make a decision as the commission at that event.
Oh, no. We want their input. So if there are some and you could take back.
I
that-
thought there were a few people on the Complete Streets. There's Kathleen Nolan.
Well, we have a couple, but this would really be for the hedges and fences and walls. Everybody's got their own idea, and we could use as much help as possible.
Yes.
And I'll be asking the HPC to come out because they have the landmark, the Mills Act, the untouchables, and all those other special considerations. And we ought to all really get together and help each other figure this thing out,
Okay.
is the way I see it.
Any help we can provide, I'd be happy to show up myself.
Okay, that'd be great. Thank you very
It's an
much.
important thing. Okay, thank you.
I don't know.
It's always from 2:30 to 4:30 on the first Wednesday of the month prior to the Planning Commission meeting, August 5th.
Okay. Sherry, I need some help. We are a fistful of meeting minute approval in arrears. And how would we start to tackle that?
One person can make a motion, one board member can make a motion on all 4 items, And another board member can make a second, and we can vote on all four at the same
Okay,
time.
before we do that, Mr. Clark, do you have any comments or anything that you'd like to add at this time before we start getting into the drudgery of the line items here?
No, I have no comments.
Okay, Mr. Summers, anything in the meeting minutes?
No comments.
Nothing? Building officials? No. None? Okay.
For the record, I'm not allowed to vote on the first two because I was not a member of the board at the time of those meetings.
When we call roll call, you say abstain from item
Abstain.
1 and 2.
Okay, great.
Dale?
I just want to say that I want one correction that I noticed, that it's a minor thing, but to the person, it may not mean minor. In the last meeting, the May 18th meeting, the person that was here representing the solar project, his name was Wayne Pendry, not Hendry. Pendrey. Thank you.
Can make that change.
Okay.
Did you have anything else, Dale, that you
So
wanted to
that's
do?
all.
Well, then I would move approval of the consent items with the correction noted by Member Hanson.
May I have a second?
I'll second.
Ulrich? On all four. Farmer?
Yes.
On all four. Chair Daddy?
Yes on all four.
Quillisi?
Abstain from 1 and 2, and yes on 3 and 4.
Thank you. Hanson?
Abstain from April 13th, number 3. I wasn't here, but I approve the others.
Thank you.
Wow. Okay, it appears we're rapidly at number 5. For some reason, when I read this last time, I took a look, and there was a phrase in here that kind of threw me. And it was like, the really quick and easy, no sweat permit. And I know this didn't, I know those didn't happen. And after looking at this thing, I took a real strong look, and I realized that this isn't a do-it-yourselfer. This is maybe an easy permit, maybe easy paperwork, but it's a very complicated process. And so I'm going to ask for some discussion, but I'm going to make a statement that we discussed this ad nauseum last time. I don't believe there's anything new. We have a September date that we need to comply with state law at that time, and we need an approval to give the city the ability to move along with this thing and adopt it and get it going. And so what I'd ask for is a very short comment and then let's rapidly move through this. Anybody have anything from the last?
Chair Daddy, can I just make a couple of comments?
Absolutely.
Just to add to what you discussed last time, in this new report, we included the 2015 California guidelines. Previously, you had the 2014. They have subsequently been updated. The other issue is after closer review and discussion with my colleagues in the county, it's the state law only allows us to make modifications for geographic I can never say this word.
Seismologic?
And topographic conditions that are specific to.
When did that change? Because what my understanding was, it was topographic.
This is a special condition for these particular
Okay, so the
rules.
seismological got added
Right.
only for this.
For this one.
For the rest of the 33,000
Yes, right.
pages is California code.
That is correct.
Seismological's not in
Right.
there.
That is correct. So we're very limited to be able to make changes. In my discussion with my fellow building officials in the county, I got the understanding that they're really not making any changes, and they're going to go with the state guidelines for the enforcement of that. really, the driving force behind that is the industry, because things are changing so quickly in this industry. We're having to make constant modifications to keep up to date on this. And I also wanted to add it, Larry Beam, our deputy building official, is here with us tonight as well. Larry does the plan review and the majority of the inspections on the photovoltaic systems for us. So if you have any technical questions, I'll probably be referring them to Larry.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any, Dale, any questions?
Okay, I have just a single question, and I recognize that the proposed ordinance here is virtually word for word from the state document. But one of the things that I've tried to stress as we go through any of these processes is that the things that the city does and the things that the city requires have to be clear to the general population. And I'm speaking in particular on page 2 of attachment A, item 5A, the applicant shall verify to the applicant's reasonable satisfaction through the use of standard engineering evaluation techniques that such and such is true. I would contend that if you could find an applicant who wanted a solar system who could in fact do that, that would be an unusual person. And I would suggest that as a part of implementing this ordinance, that the city make very clear, concise, and quantifiable guidelines for people so that they can say, okay, I think I'm doing that, or I guess I better go find somebody who's in the business of installing solar systems to tell me that, yes, it's okay. Right now, if I walked in wanting a solar system on my house, and I'm not uneducated, but I'm uneducated in this area in particular, I wouldn't know whether to say to my reasonable satisfaction that any of this stuff is true. And so I think we need something that clarifies some of this, not change the state law, not change the wording of the ordinance if it's required by state law, but something to help the general population of applicants to understand more clearly what's required. That's my request, that we do something to supplement this. Thank you.
Mr. Ulrich, any? Mr. Farmer? No. I do have one question. As I'm looking at this one diagram here, and I'm trying to remember from last month, on the solar water schematic that shows, you know, like when I used to work on nuclear submarines, right?
Can you cite a page?
No, I can't cite a page. I could have a second ago, but I was so busy listening to what you had to say, I flipped over it. It is page 78.
78, okay.
This, of course, isn't to scale. Don't we have some setbacks? Don't we have some areas? I believe that we talked that we had some areas clearly that needed to have the ability for the firemen to have clear roof space and only a certain amount of coverage. This looks like 100% coverage on this one side. Is it different with a water than an electric? I mean, because it doesn't appear you could have water on one side, electric on the other side, and 100% of the roof covered and be in compliance.
First of all, yes, it is different between water and electric because the fireman is going to be addressing this with a pike and water on him at the time. So their clearances for a PV system, a photovoltaic, are touchier than it would be with a water system. The water system, our main concern would be more in Mr. Quilsy's deal is, will the roof support it?
Well, yeah.
And that would be where we would have more questions. But the fire department's access to the roof and all with a system that is not presenting a danger to them as
Not a
far
fire
as
danger.
electrical shock. And as I understand from talking to these guys, it's not just the shock, it's that actually, you know, you lose your footing, and all of that if you get a shock So they have their pathways up. I would question this diagram also, Bob, in that it may be recommended that they do have a pathway up to the ridge, because they're not showing a clear path, and the firemen have to get to there. And we look at it, and we would maybe verify this with the county fire if it came up with a system that took this much of the roof system, because I would say they still need to get to the roof.
Right.
That's one of those unwritten requirements.
It's a.
And another area where the city could clarify what's required so that citizens know what they're going to be allowed to do.
But as far as the clearances that we are talking about, it's in the electrical section of the code. I agree.
And that's exactly what I'm
I
talking about.
agree that this
I
would
would like it to
present
be.
an access issue.
Well, actually, I see it as a little bit different. You got to have access either way, but a completeness of information issue. So if we could, I don't care if we take a sticky and we put it on and then we photograph a sticky that says, see roof detail for electric, right?
Yeah.
Just something, because that's the most frustrating part of dealing.
We have not had one of these systems
You will.
yet.
I would,
Okay, they came out primarily in the 70s and 80s. They were very popular.
Yeah.
We're not seeing them right now. It's,
Ground mounted. There's a lot of these that are ground mounted now, which is interesting to me, because people call and say, do we have insurance for these? Like, what are we doing? Anyhow, Mr. Summers, did you have something you'd like to add?
I did, thank you, Chair Daddy. I think this is one of the elements that would be picked up in the checklist. And in fact, if you look to page 25 of attachment D, fire safety access ways is part of the state sample checklist. And I'm not sure if the city has yet developed our checklist, but I think that our checklist would substantially conform to the state's checklist and would pick up this fire access requirement, and that would provide the opportunity for the public who's looking at this and saying, what do I need to do to get a small solar system, and to understand that requirement.
This is part of the same issue that we discussed when we discussed second units.
Yeah.
Clear access pathways provided.
Doesn't say.
What does that mean?
I think that would be.
Do I need to provide
I
a
see what you're saying. You want it
1 foot
further-
piece along the edge of the roof, or 3 feet, or 6 feet? I, as a homeowner who wants to apply for something, I need something a little more specific so that I know what I can do.
And what I would say in regards to that, it's their 462-foot max. That's the maximum you can put on a roof, is 462 feet. And if we're going to go ahead and have, let's say, an 18-inch setback along the rim and the front edge and the roof peak, right? All of a sudden now we've shrunk this thing down 3 feet by 3 feet and by 40 feet, and all of a sudden now we've taken that 700 or 800 half of a roof and we've moved it down to maybe somewhere under. So that's what I'm looking for.
that's within the range of what their rapid permit. Anything that's more than that, we would be looking at over a longer period of time, going out, maybe making more inspections.
But again, that's what we're trying to avoid. We would like something where the people just look at it, it's either there or not. They either say it's a rapid or it's a regular, and they move on, and everybody's happy. So whatever we can do.
And the applicants have no way of knowing right now what category they fall into. Rapid or regular. I don't want to say slow, just rapid or regular.
Wouldn't most homeowners,
I'm sorry?
Larry, wouldn't
Have you got
most,
your
I'm
mic
sorry.
on?
Wouldn't the majority of the homeowners be relying on somebody that knew what they were doing? I know me as a homeowner, I wouldn't,
3 years up here that were done by homeowners. One was an electrical engineer, and the other was fairly competent at what he was doing. He understood his circuitry, he understood the project. Most of these, and the other thing is, the suppliers, if they do their own, the major supply companies provide the design work, and they have their engineers.
They have a
give
PE on staff.
and they have their staff, and they're able to, from what I've talked to these guys that have done their own, they run it by their staff. They have the state fire marshals set up. They have the engineering and all. And yes, most of these guys, we're coming through a contractor, and if the roof is even close, they provide separate engineering documents. So the people that are installing these, by and large, are just solar professionals.
But your electrical engineer couldn't certify the structural,
He could not certify the
capacity
structure.
of the
He
garage
he
roof.
understood that he needed to.
so, yeah.
To answer your question about the fire requirements, it's really addressed on page 96 and 97. 4.6, it talks about the additional requirements based from the local fire department, and it actually talks about a California Residential Code section 331, which actually specifies clearances, which is a state mandated code. So we have it addressed. It's just not clear in this document, but it's there.
Are copies of such things as the California Residential Code, Section 331.5, available here at City Hall for citizens to look at?
Yeah,
On
it's
free access online.
It's actually online for the Building Standards Commission, and we have hard copies that we're required by state law to have
Okay.
in the building official's office.
As long as we make it clear for the people, they can understand what has to be done and what can't be done, yeah.
Any more discussion? Can I get a motion?
I'll move approval.
Can I get a second? Mr. Ulrich, thank you. Sherry?
Ulrich? Yes. Farmer?
Yes.
Daddy?
Yes.
Quillisi?
Yes.
Hanson? Passes.
Okay, item 6, moving along.
Where are we here?
Item 6, Building Appeals Board. This is for the vacant property maintenance, security, and registration. It's way back. This one. You got yours, Bill? Okay. Who would like to start speaking on this, since we have a couple of, we have about three different avenues from the staff waiting over here to
So-
jump on this thing?
Yeah, Chairman and members of the board, we did ask the city attorney to review the vacant building ordinance, and he's given you a confidential memo on that, but I'd like him to walk through that and then respond to whatever questions that you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. I hope you've all received my memorandum, and if you haven't, let me know. I'll start with an overview of the governing law and then point to some suggested recommendations that I have at looking through our vacant building ordinance. And the overall rule is that the city has broad police power to regulate the health and safety of the public, and also that picks up to regulate and promote the public's health, safety, and welfare. It's a fairly broad set of powers, but it isn't completely without limits. And one of those limits is when we're looking at this type of ordinance where we're modifying people's use of real property and modifying structures on property, we're limited to reasonable connections to a legitimate government purpose to be back within our police power regulations. And so anything that picks up a health or a safety concern or a significant structural concern or an aesthetic concern that rises to the level of creating blight, which has been viewed by several courts as harming the public's welfare, that's within the city's realm to regulate. We can regulate something that is unsafe and make it safe, or something that causes blight and end the blight. If something, however, isn't either unsafe or substandard or structurally unsound or else sufficiently aesthetically problematic to be an issue of blight, but is less than that, that's where the city doesn't have as strong a basis to regulate that and to require that set of improvements. Keeping that set of standards in mind, I've got a couple of suggestions for recommended changes. The first would be and let's see, referring to attachment A, page 2, the definition of evidence of vacancy. I think we should delete the last portion, the absence of furnishings and/or personal items consistent with residential habitation. Reasoning that if a building is safe, secure, aesthetically acceptable, but merely empty, that's not within the city's power to force it to be not empty. The next one is, let's see, page 3. Again, attachment A, section 9-1503, owner responsibilities, and subsection A2. And it would be to delete the section that is ready for occupancy.
It starts, the building meets all applicable
Yeah.
codes, though.
Exactly. It starts, so I would recommend that it read, the building meets all applicable codes, health and safety codes, is not a dangerous building, and is maintained to the levels required in section 9-1510A. And the definition of a dangerous building is back in the definitions of chapter 15, so we have a definition for that term. And what it does is it removes the reference to ready for occupancy, again, because if a building is safe, sound, aesthetically appropriate, but not ready for occupancy under the current market. For example, it might have interior either sub-market standard or else literally sub-code standard, but not structurally unsound and not aesthetically a problem and not unsafe. We wouldn't have the ability to force that to be fixed up to be ready for occupancy.
It could be in fact empty.
Exactly. It could just be literally empty, but otherwise solid, and we can't force it to be unempty. We can force it to look good. We can force it to fix any code issues, any a roof cave-in or whatnot, but we can't force it to, if it is maintained as pristine, we can't require it to be occupied.
Would you elaborate on code issues?
Sure. I think there we pick up any of the building code provisions or the zoning code provisions that have a connection back to health and safety and public welfare.
Are we looking at seismic retrofit? And
I would
again,
think-
I don't want to get
Yeah.
too detailed, but you understand what I'm trying to say? When we say applicable to current codes.
I think it would go back
Got a
to,
40-year-old building here that is a vacant building, which is the bowling alley. I'm just,
it would connect back
I'm guessing
to.
the applicable health and safety codes on a 40-year-old building are different from those on a new building. Is that right?
Yes, and it would be a function of whether or not the code violation at issue renders the building unsafe. So with an unreinforced masonry building, is it safe or not would require an inspection of the building and thus an evaluation of whether or not it's likely to fall down the next earthquake, certain to fall down the next earthquake, somewhere between. We can't necessarily force an unreinforced building that is more or less probably solid to be reinforced, but if it's unreinforced and, for example, hasn't been maintained, the roof hasn't been maintained so that the roof tie to the building's wall is separating, then that would be a different situation. But then we could come in and require that the roof tie back to the building's walls.
But there would have to be a reason to initiate an inspection, right? Just arbitrarily couldn't.
we can't hear you at home unless you have your mic on.
I'm sorry. But just to arbitrarily initiate an inspection, something would have to kick that off, right?
We'd have to have cause to be
Right.
able to make that
Right.
inspection.
Okay.
But I just want to provide some clarity here, is that a clearly unreinforced masonry building is defined under the existing building code by the state of California, has a whole different set of standards than a building that was built under some previous code requirement. So, and I don't want to get in great detail with you tonight, I could probably spend 8 hours talking about this, but But that's not the standard we're talking about here. So I just want to make that clear.
Okay, and what brings us to light, and I'd like the other commissioners to think about this and maybe weigh in on it. It's the chicken or the egg theory. I'm wondering if we have so many of these buildings because the people think that they're going to have to spend so much money bringing them up to code, which is a presumption, probably not a fact,
Bad assumption.
that it prohibits people from even opening the door to try to find out and going down that yellow brick road. So I think that's for a different discussion. That's not for this second. If we could then move on to 915.03.3. Do fences indicate number 3?
Under A, sub 3, evidence of vacancy.
1503, what?
1503.3.
1503A3?
A3?
A3, okay.
Starting off with there's no evidence?
Yeah.
Yeah, starting off with there's.
Okay,
There
we're
was
on
no
that
evidence
section.
when you've got a 6-foot hurricane fence that's got padlocks and, all these kind of things. It kind of looks like there is evidence. And so I'm wondering, what are we going to do with that portion of this?
That ties back to the definition of evidence of vacancy, which at the moment does not reference fencing, particularly cyclone fencing or other chain link fencing. So that would be something, if we wanted to build that in, we'd have to add that to the definition of evidence of vacancy.
The fencing is prohibited in another part of the code.
That is also the case, and as I understand it, there's been some, a disconnect between previous vacant building abatement plans, which required cyclone fencing or chain link fencing, and the zoning code, which in the section on fences and walls, I can't cite chapter and verse off the top of my head, but I know it's there.
Fences and walls need to be back 40 feet and can't be higher than 6 foot.
And it prohibits chain link fence.
Yeah.
Oh, is it discourages? I thought it was prohibits.
No, it
We'll double check
prohibits.
that. So there needs to be some connection between that section of the code and this section of the code.
Okay, and then to move on, B, boarded building then is definitely evidence of vacancy. There's very clear, there should be no
Yep.
question.
And this is the other one where I would recommend a modification to read, the owner of any boarded building, whether boarded by voluntary action of the owner or as a result of enforcement action by the city, shall cause the boarded building to be in compliance with all applicable health and safety codes, to ensure the building is not a dangerous building, again as defined, and to ensure that the building is maintained at levels required in section 91510A. The change deletes the reference to rehabilitated for occupancy, again, because we can't require it to go up to that level. We can make it look good, be safe, but not be ready to occupy. Let's see, the last one on my list of recommended changes is on page, attachment A, 7 of 9, section 9:15:10, subsection C, let's see, C2, which at the moment reads, maintenance of the building in continuing compliance with all applicable building and other applicable codes.
Right.
I recommend we modify this, and this speaks to the issue we were just discussing, that we make it maintenance of the building in continuing compliance with all applicable health and safety codes, maintenance to ensure the building is not a dangerous building, and maintenance to the levels required in section 91510A, which is on the previous page and picks up, among other things, not being boarded, paint and finishes in good condition, et cetera.
Yep. Landscape.
And I'm open to discussion on any of these points. I just wanted to start with a recommendation.
I've looked at every one of these buildings. If they're vacant, if they're fenced, and no one's inside, how do they become dangerous? And again, I take this is not my personal opinion. I'm asking this as a fire and casualty underwriter that looks at these things professionally. I only know one of these buildings that would be dangerous, is dangerous, only if people were inside of the premise, because the joists are down, the roof is clearly clearly falling down at any moment. So that would be the only one, but again, well, what are we gonna do about, there's no danger if the people are not in it. And so I'm kind of concerned that as I look through the memorandum and I reread this again and again and again, I, as an underwriter, use some things, and we, with my company, have more attorneys than anybody on the planet. And we have some stipulations in our insurance codes that have to do with safety in buildings that run contrary to a number of these things. One of the things that we say is that we delineate between unoccupied and vacant. Unoccupied means that there's stuff in there, there's just nobody there. Vacant means it's pretty bare wall to wall. It's really pretty bare. And so I had a vacant building across the street from me for 19 and a half years. We had dozens and dozens of occupants up to the date it was sold, living in the house unbeknownst to the owner who had it for sale, except they kept forgetting to make the bed. They were living there. We had transients, we had party houses, we had drug houses, and here's what happened as a coincidence. The people up Foothill Road will tell you that there was an enormous amount of missing mail, and we went through different flurries of burglary and robberies and vandalisms. Different flurries depending on which gang moved in. And so when I take a look at some of these things where they're boarded at the street, as we have the old Forest Service building, they're boarded at the street, they're completely disguised, there is no visibility, the police can't see with the drive-by. We have broken windows out of it, we have brush, we have fire hazards, we have all of these things. What's your best guesstimate? What are we really going to need to do to put in here where that thing gets cleaned up, the premise gets cleaned up, the trash gets cleaned up, it can't show the broken buildings, and then we have fences that are planning departments purview where you clearly can't have a 6-foot fence on the sidewalk on Ojai Avenue. And that has been there for years, and so I'm wondering, we can make a lot of recommendations and we can say a lot of things, but one of the things that I asked when we had 3 council people here a number of months ago, and we pretty much said, what do you want us to do with this thing? They said, we want enforcement. And so what I had asked, and I'll ask again, is do we have a plan or a path to notification and court within a 30-day period of time? I don't really care about the details. We'll change the details. Once we've complied with the details and they haven't complied, are we going to have a path to court? And what do we need to do to get to that path to court? Because I don't really see where these matter. If in fact, we've had nuisance buildings here for years, just like we have nuisance hedges, just like we have nuisance chickens and roosters, just like we've got nuisance wrecked cars up on the front lawn, just like we've got dozens and dozens and dozens of different things. And I'm just wondering what the path is. Now, I've only seen twice where we've actually enforced. We enforced across the street with that vacant lot, and we enforced on the Chevrolet property at Franklin and Montgomery. And that made people nervous when we went in and literally bulldozed the property when we got done. That made people nervous. We now, 5 years later, have a vacant city lot. And so what I'm wondering is, by making these changes and going through this and rereading it and starting to think about a number of things that you put in here, I'm just wondering if the intent of this program isn't a forced path to renting the property, because if we're not going to enforce.
And what it is this, with the tweaks I've suggested and whatever other tweaks we come up with, modifications we come up with that council approves, then we have the path to use the tool in this ordinance, the vacant building abatement plan, create a plan, put it in place for each of the properties, starting with the ones of most concern and going through the list. And then if they don't comply, then take them to court in compliance with the ordinance and compliance with the options. That obviously takes some considered effort on the part of staff, which I understand direction from council has been given to work on that, starting again with the highest priority properties and going from there. And it's a matter of continuing to enforce it.
Okay, and again, I'm puzzled. What I thought we were gonna get, and shame on me, but what I thought we were doing was we were discussing the legality of the amount of fines we could impose, how much and how fast in getting through. That's what I had originally thought the entire purpose was. I'm not knocking anybody. I'm just saying I'm looking through here and I'm going, hey, where'd the money go? Where'd this go? Where'd the 30 days go? We're going to cut off a finger at, right?
Okay. So we're looking for more.
Well, no, I thought that's what
Specificity.
we asked for, like about 2 or 3 months. I thought that's what we wanted to do, and what we wanted to do was put a program in place, which was a finished product that just said, look, we're going to take a census, we're going to notify, we're going to let them know that they've got to be current with their property management, which is the code. We're going to give them an entire checklist of compliance. We're going to ask them comply. We're going to give them a reasonable time. We're going to send a fine and say, every day you don't do this after this day, it costs so much money. And if there's so many days out of compliance, then you're going to see them in court.
And we can certainly do that.
Because one of the things that I've asked the council, and I did it the first of the year, was please don't make any changes, laws, or ordinances that we don't intend to enforce, or we don't have a path to enforce. Mr. Wyrick, you seem to have your hand up. Would you like to?
Yes, I have a public comment. I thought before you start deliberating, you could solicit public comment, and I have one, okay? Then deliberate away.
Actually, we weren't ready yet, but go ahead.
Well, it's germane to what you were talking about, all right? I wanted to point out a broad view here as an elected official. I want to remind everybody when this ordinance was passed, less than 5 years ago. Less than 5 years ago, this thing was effective December 9th in 2010. So less than 5 years ago, the city attorney was paid thousands of dollars by the taxpayers to draft this thing. Went through all the review of staff and the various commissions, and the council approved it, and nothing happened. Less than 5 years ago. And so now what we're doing is, and then when council gave direction, let's enforce this thing. And the next step, of course, is to implement it. We need to get a recommendation for fees. Then staff asked, not the council, not the board, not the commission, staff asked the attorney to review the ordinance. Again, that a previous city attorney had assumed, completely vetted, less than 5 years ago. As a taxpayer, I want everybody to think about that. It seems like we have a pattern where when council asks for ordinances to be enforced, the response is, well, let's study it some more before we enforce it, and let's look at it again. And I think that this is an issue of concern where we come up with reasons for not doing things rather than doing things. No, and then the second point I want to make is there's a severability clause in this ordinance. If there are some specific issues that the current city attorney has with, that the city attorney less than 5 years ago did not have with this ordinance, then it's severable. Start the registration process. Start the mechanics that are not controversial, and carve out the ones that are an issue with the severability clause. Of course, the severability clause applies, if something is found by the court, but I assume it would also apply to selective use. Now, I want to point out something. Didn't take me long to find out there's more than 110 cities in the state of California that had a vacant building ordinances. They mostly were passed in 08, 09, 010, about the same time this ordinance was passed in the city of Ojai. I suspect the way these things work, this was probably a copied template from another city, from this whole flurry of adoptions that was going on at that time, vetted by our city attorney, duly passed by the city council, and then not implemented. And so I started looking at about 24 of these, and look at all 110 of them. And the templates all have the word ready for occupancy. That city attorney is questioning. Now, here's my question, is that what's happened, has there been, if you would think of 110 cities, at least the prima facie case that I'm looking at is they're all pretty much the same pattern, include, every one of them I looked at used the phrase ready for occupancy, that if there was an issue legally with that, somebody would have challenged it by now. Or maybe all 110 cities are not enforcing their vacant building ordinance. I don't know. The question I have that I really, as a council person that I have, is that when we are, the case, there are no cases cited in the city attorney's review of court challenges to the ready for occupancy phrase or other phrases. In other words, the point I'm trying to make is that if the council in 2010 felt that was a policy, and now we're questioning whether it's legal or not, where is there an example of a specific issue that's been brought up in the courts with that, as opposed to the very general cases cited, which are not specific to any challenge to any vacant building ordinance. Not a single case was cited in the analysis of a specific legal challenge to any specific vacant building ordinance. So I'm not questioning that whether or not it might be well advisable to, Mr. Quillisi, you did a very good analysis, I thought, of some mechanics that needed clarification and everything like that. But backing off from a ready for occupancy phrase is a policy issue. And the council may or may not want to do that. I mean, that's up to, but what I'm concerned with is that we seem to get involved in perpetual reviews of ordinance.
Analysis paralysis.
Exactly. And I think we have another example of that here. And you were, again, I think the idea was to proceed with implementation of the ordinance per council direction in terms of looking at fees and everything. And instead, now we're getting an analysis of why the whole thing, not the whole thing, but significant elements of it need to be changed. But again, I repeat what I have heard repeatedly, that there is a presumption of legality in a duly deliberated legislative process, which is what we have here, and that we need to be, rather than trying to figure out how, what every problem may be, that if in fact if there's a policy goal we want to follow, what's the way to get there, as opposed to figuring out legal reasons for not following a policy goal. I think there's a distinction. And I just wanted to bring the perspective, and I'll close by repeating the same thing. What's going on in this city, where less than 5 years ago, thousands of dollars are spent on attorneys to vet ordinances that are not implemented, and then when council gives direction to implement it, we have to do a complete legal review again. What's going on? Thank you.
I was there for some of that. I think the number was 20 grand. It came from Palm Springs by way of Long Beach is the original, law. Let me digress and get back. I thought that what we were going to do tonight is we were going to look at the legality of the amount of fine. And I thought on our part, there was a misconception about $1,000 a day maximum fine. And so I came into this meeting thinking that we were going to be vetted and told if that $1,000 fine was legal. And how long we would have to apply it before we could go into court and take action. At least that's what I thought from about 3 months ago was going to happen. And so if somebody could help me.
So are you speaking of the requirements of the municipal code outside of the vacant building ordinance when you talk about $1,000 a day?
Well, I'm just, for $1,000 a day I was trying to determine, or find out what we could do, what the maximum fine was for non-compliance for not registering the building, not having proper signage, not having a property manager, not keeping it in good condition, having the fences up, having the graffiti on the for sale sign at the bowling alley. When we could notice the people, they had to remedy the conditions. What the shortest amount of time we had to give them, because some of them have had 25 years now to remedy the condition, and how soon we could move that along. So could we send them a letter and say you need to be registered? We want the name of the property management. We want that weekly report. We want all these other things that Mr. Quillisi can go over better than anybody and cite. And you have until this date to do this. At such time, we give you a fine. At such time, we take you to court. And that's what I was hoping we were going to do tonight. So we could get that done. We could apply the numbers. We could go ahead and agree with the process and procedure, make a recommendation to council as soon as possible and move on with this. Because what we're doing is we're adding a couple more buildings now. They're gaining on us. We're losing ground. They're getting traction. And so now we're having more buildings and more buildings. And what I understood from council, and what I understood when council came to the meeting a number of months ago, was they wanted tools to enforce and get rid of this blight within the city. And what they wanted to do is they wanted to incentivize people to make the most of the opportunity within the city. And if nothing else, and I know this is going to be contradictory, if nothing else, each one of these has to have and maintain landscape. And so some of them have been non-compliant for the full 5 years. And so today's the 21st of July. Can we have these people in court by the 21st of September? Can we go through? Can we write this thing? We already have the ordinance. I'm not really concerned, again, about the occupants and the other things. I'm concerned about the package where we have a detailed census. We have detailed deficiencies. We have a detailed list of everything they need to do to get up to compliance. They have a date to get to compliance. They have a fine that's associated with that after a date when they're non-compliant, or they have a process that's noticed where they can appeal and apply for more time and more help, because it may not be something you can do in a minute. And then at such time when they either are unable or unwilling to, I want to take completely out of the city guidelines for compliance, working with them. What we need to do is get compliance, and we need to get full understanding of the rules. I'm not talking about, oh boy, somebody's got a car that's in the front driveway without a plate. You know, we're not talking about that. We're talking about these buildings, and I understand staff is short. I did ask one of the council people, the unholiest of things, I said, we need some help for staff. Staff has got an awful lot of things going on, and what I would like to see the city do is maybe pull a street or two out of the paving and take that money and give the different departments additional staff to tackle all of these problems that are being backlogged. And one of the things, I'm not even going to try to pronounce it and slaughter your name a second time. But one of the things that we desperately need to have is timely packets Mine came in around 5 o'clock, 5 o'clock on Friday. We're really going to need to start having more time on the complexity of these things. I mean, I'm willing to just pass on an entire meeting and give the staff a month to be able to get me a proposed agenda so I can look at it, add some things, make some corrections, ask some questions, get some information, send it back, and then get it complete with everything in. And then have it so the board has at least, golly, 5 days, 6 days, 7 days to take a look at it and digest. You know, I mean, this solar stuff is not that easy. Some of these other things aren't easy. And I know it's not easy for the public, and I'd like them, because that's the ones we're here for tonight. It's not for me. I'm not getting paid that much. I guess I'm on the wrong commission. I'm kidding. So I would hope we could make those changes, but those were the answers I was looking for. And since everybody's gathered here, I mean, I would rather not discuss this anymore, because I don't see any of the items I need to discuss it. But since the board is here, I'm going to give the staff and the board an opportunity to discuss anything they would like to on this. But then I need to make my, shame on me, I didn't make myself clear enough that those were my expectations. And if I can get the agenda in there, I can look and then I can list and say, hey, I had an expectation these 5 or 6 things would be here. We had 1 or we had all 6, thank you. Whatever it is, because we need to just move on, get these things knocked out of the park and go. Because we have so many alligators coming up. They're gaining on us. We're not gaining on them, they're gaining on us. Do I have anybody here that would then like to make comments, open up on this, say something?
I want to speak specifically to the property manager part. And I'm looking at Section 9, 1509. Specifically right now, I'm looking at B. The last sentence in B, it is the company, that's the property management company's responsibility to bring the property into compliance. Now, you realize that most property managers are not dealing with owners, they're dealing with tenants. And so you have some leverage over a tenant. You can ask them to vacate if they don't do what they need to do, or you can file an eviction notice against them, but this is a property owner. So what kind of leverage does a property manager have? How does he go about getting the owner to meet the abatement plan? And then, I mean, I have other questions all around that, but as a beginning, I don't know how, I mean, I work with 2 property managers in my office, and I know what they do on a day in and day out basis. It's not this type of thing. I'm not saying it's not doable. I just don't understand how a property manager would do that. Do you, Tom? You're a realtor.
This is the markup. That's the original.
So I throw that question out, and then,
Attachment B.
so how does the property manager get paid for this weekly inspection that he's doing? And how does he go about issuing the warning? Does he write a letter to the people? There's just a lot of things that's not real clear to me. And frankly, I don't know any property manager that'd be willing to do this. I'm not saying there aren't some out there.
Oh, no.
I know quite a few property managers, not that we have a lot in the city, but we've got 5 or 6. And I've talked to 2 of them. I could talk to others.
Oh, it's a good catch. It's one I missed. I agree with you. 1509B, it should not be, if company refers to the property management company, it should not be their responsibility to bring the property into compliance. It should be the property owner, trustee, beneficiary, whoever it is that's defined over in 15.03.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the people that actually have the pecuniary liability, if you will. And Mr. Summers, there was a word you used that started with an R, and I made a little mention here that we need to put a definition in 1502. And I can't remember, got so wrapped up in this, I forgot the word you were using.
Rehabilitated?
Rehabilitate. No, well, maybe that was it.
Was it evidence of vacancy?
No,
Or
probably was rehabilitate.
Look through my,
I think the only thing he referred to in his notes in 1502 was.
No, there was
evidence
something
of
else.
vacancy.
You'll
But
be able to
I think-
watch-
I think
You'll
we
be able
oughta-
to
yeah.
watch the tape.
Yes, that's a good point. But I agree with you. I think we ought to go through attachment B, see what we agree with and what we don't agree with, and move it along to the city council, and if there are other things that need to be done, then we pick them up at the next meeting and make fine-tuning changes. Because right now, not only are we not enforcing this, we have no financial penalties involved with enforcing it if we chose to do so.
Well, on that point, this ordinance sets up three different types of fees, 2 fees and a fine. There's the annual registration fee, there's the vacant property fee, and then there's fines for maintaining a property in violation of these standards. The
Okay.
first 2 fees don't yet have a fee established, that needs to be done. This last one, though, is the general fines that are built into the first part of the municipal code, and that's built in through page 9 of attachment A, section 9:15:17. Violations of this chapter are strict liability offenses. Anybody can be subject to prosecution or administrative enforcement under Title I, Chapter 6, which is the general enforcement provisions for the municipal code. So we have the ability now to either prosecute as a criminal matter or, as can be more effective in certain cases, bring a civil abatement action against a property owner for maintaining a property in violation. The trick, of course, is that we would want to ensure that the actions brought are indeed ones that the city has the power to
And constitute due process that's well understood by anyone who reads the ordinance. And that's part of what I tried to do with 1504, I think, set up a process.
And so, as I understand it, the fees that need to be set are the ones in section, I just had it. Where did it go?
1915-7? 1915-7?
7, yes.
Under C, fees imposed.
That is correct.
There's monitoring, there's registration, there's monitoring.
There's the monitoring fee is the 15.7, and then there's a registration fee also imposed under 15.5. And that's for properties that are,
Right, registration under
Default or-
1505, monitoring under 1506 describes the monitoring program.
the fee for that
1507
is
actually talks
1507.
about departmental responsibility
yep.
and fees.
So I think those are the 2 fees that need to be set by the council, which the council can do at its next meeting, for which the agenda hasn't yet been posted.
Okay, in my proposed addition to the city fee schedule, I also called out 1509, 1511, and 1512. 1509 for city contracting with a local property management firm, or a fine for, that is a fee, $250 plus the cost of the contract. 1509, a fine for failure to contract. And 1511, a contract for securing a vacant building or failure to secure a vacant building. And 1512, develop and submit an abatement plan or failure to do so. And I think we need all of those. But it depends on some other changes I've suggested as well.
Excuse me, could I mention one thing? That the annual registration fee, we do have one in our books, $180 that we charge. I charge currently to register vacant properties.
Oh, where is it? I couldn't find it in the
Is that
city
in
fee
the
schedule.
Fee schedule?
Yeah, it's in the Community Development Department's fee schedule.
Oh, it's not,
Hey, Larry,
is that part of the
Turn up
city
the
fee
heat a little.
schedule? Or is that a locally maintained
too
list?
cold in here.
No, it's part of the fee schedule.
Okay, I
To say, if we're
apologize then, I
charging
missed
it, I
it.
do hope it's in the fee schedule.
I hope that's 76, like the state requires us to do to conserve energy.
It Originally was $90, then it got up to $180.
That's the annual registration fee for a vacant building. Yeah, okay.
Jerry, do you have any more handy fees in there that we could attach to some of these items, like 915.7C? Do you have any other fees that would apply to these half a dozen different areas? Oh, I hope the heater's not on now.
This is the air movement.
Okay.
I haven't ever collected fees on number C, or letter C.
On
Okay.
915.10, is this going to be a general failure to comply for any area single fee, which I would hope it would be, or are we going to go ahead and come up with a whole bunch of different areas and establish a whole bunch of different fees? I would hope, I know it's petty to have a big fee on a small item, but, I mean, we could make ourselves go crazy coming up with 50 different items and 50 different fines, and this one is something that is a landscape. Shall be landscaped and maintained visible front and side yards in good condition, no less than the standard of those properties within the same zone designation at the time registration was required. I would hate to be that one place and then have that dump next to me. I would hate to be the one on the other side looking at all that garbage and all that junk piled up in the back. And so, again, this is kind of an issue where the neighbors are complying, and then you have some neighbors that are not complying. And the number one thing is we didn't enforce unless it was a resident complaint. We just didn't have the codes, as you know. But now that we do now, I think it's time to get the letters out and let the people know that, you know, there's certain buildings that are out of compliance, and you are one of them. And then make sure that there's adequate time. Let's don't go for 25 years and do nothing and pull the switch at the end of the week,
So-
because that's not gonna
So,
work.
Chair Daddy, could I make a suggestion?
Certainly.
Because I think you were onto something earlier. You know, I think one of the problems that we have here is similar to the problem we had on the Robin Court building, which I think you're aware of, which was a dilapidated duplex. And that's a couple things. We struggled with that for a long time, what to do. And I think part of the reason we struggled is because we're all generalists and we don't specialize in code enforcement. We know a little bit about it, but not a lot. And the ultimate solution there was to bring in a specialist, which is kind of what you were saying earlier. We brought in an attorney who does nothing but code enforcement, was totally focused on that particular problem, and we were able to solve it, and I think in a very good way. And in my mind, this situation is analogous to that. What we really need is to have someone who's charged with focused enforcement on the most important properties first, and has the expertise and qualifications to do that, so that we're not doing it as an ancillary duty with 20 other things and without that level of expertise. And I think we'd be a lot more effective if we did that.
I think we would be a lot more effective if we did that. And what happens is these buildings are really the gateway to Ojai. They're in our main corridor, and that's why it's just so egregious. And while we're doing this, I am going to take the liberty to digress. I took a picture of a number of some of the 18 motorhomes that we have that are used as residents within the corridor. It's certainly their right, and there certainly are laws, and it's the DMV certainly has different things they enforce the city can't enforce. The city can enforce a few things. But what I would ask we would do is we would go ahead and put a 7-foot height requirement within the first 2 blocks north and south of Ojai Avenue. from Gridley Street down that prevents a lot of line of sight issues. And it
That's
prevents
7 feet for the vehicles?
7 feet height for the vehicles to be parked along
Parked
within
overnight.
parked period within the first 2 blocks of Ojai Avenue.
We're sort of veering from the published agenda.
Yeah, I know. But
We'll make
again,
note of that
we're
comment.
talking about blighted buildings. These are nothing more than mobile blighted buildings. I've got a couple of dozen pictures of them where they're parked and they're parked and they're parked. So, I mean, if we're going to take care of blight along the corridor, let's take care of that. And then you haul the great big giant trash thing parked in front of B of A every weekend. And all the for sale things as people come in. So yes, I did digress, but, you know, if we're gonna get in there, we're gonna get somebody that's gonna be specialize in blight, and we're gonna try to get somebody to handle some of this. Let's get them to handle some of this stuff.
So my recommendation, and I think it's consistent with what you said about canceling streets, but I don't think we have to cancel a street to get there, is to bring someone in who, with specialized expertise to focus on the key vacant buildings. Once and you, in your earlier conversations, have identified the main corridor on Ojai Avenue as being the place where that attention should be focused.
Initiated, for sure.
Yeah. Now, there is a history of us trying to implement this ordinance, and it's not very successful. But, you know, we have used this ordinance on a number of occasions to try and get people to deal with some of the cleanup issues and some of the presentation issues of some of these buildings. But it hasn't gotten to the core issue, which is to once and for all, solve the issue on particular properties. So my recommendation would be focus, as you have suggested, on the maybe 3 most prominent vacant buildings on Ojai Avenue first, and to hire the guns that we need to do that effectively.
Okay, and again, I would suggest that we go back and get the fees, and get the process, get the procedure, get the census, make sure we identify them, and then make sure that we get concurrence. Well, we're going to get concurrence on everything from council, but make sure that we have suggested a reasonable time. Again, when something has gone fallow for decades.
I mean, as to that, if we give them 30 days from the first letter, a court would find, even with the history, if the city hasn't, in its most recent iteration, given them a little bit of time, that probably would be viewed as unreasonable. But if we give them 30 days, that would be almost certainly be viewed as reasonable. 30 days to fix the list of issues on each property. Then, if they don't fix it in 30 days, it's, as we suspect they won't in a number of these cases, then start up with the fines. And in that regard, there's a couple of different options. I think one of the most useful options is to go ahead and either use the current provisions that allow for the collection of the minimum fees for violations of the municipal code, or better, adopt this proposed set of fees as modified by the council, and then impose a fee on each of those elements, then collect the fees through an administrative order under Chapter 6 of Title I, which is a relatively quick process, and they can appeal to a hearing officer, but they always have an appeal option. But then, if the hearing officer denies it, and we would ensure that there's a good record, so it would be supportable, then they have to pay the fine.
Now, who would be listening to the appeal? Who would be the hearing officer? Is that our building official? Who specifically
The
is?
city manager, the code provides that the city manager will designate a hearing officer. I would expect that one model that's used in many cases in this kind of format is to seek out a city manager of another city. There's often reciprocal arrangements between city managers to provide each other hearing officers. There's also the opportunity to use a hearing officer from the state hearing office of hearing officers. That is disfavored because they tend to be very slow. And we don't want slow, we want speedy. The other option would be to use a building official. It would not be directly appealable to the Building Appeals Board if the building official was used. The code provides that the hearing officer's decision is final. Your appeal is to a court.
What then is the next step? Because we've gone through the condemnation process before. successfully. So now we have the fines, we have the fees, we have the compliance, we have all the stipulations, we have the entire gamut of all of this stuff. And now we're going to court, and now we're collecting fees, and now we're getting court awards. And what I'd like to see in writing is when do we just go ahead and condemn the building? As we have done before. We have a process and a track record. Do I want to go there? No, but it's kind of like this. I could tell my kids 150 times not to do something. And as long as, there's no penalty, they did it 150 more times. And that's kind of the way we've allowed the people to get along, where if we're not serious, we're never going to be serious, so.
Condemning it is possible. There has to be the right basis to condemn it. That's a very property-specific analysis. And that also is a decision firmly in the hands of the council.
And what happens, how large or how long do the fees have to accrue?
We might be talking about two different things. If we outright condemn it through the city's eminent domain power, all we have to do is make a finding that there is a higher public purpose than the current use and that the city is willing to pay for it. That's
Okay,
it.
That's not what I'm
But
looking
I think,
for.
yeah, so you're
That's not
referring,
what I'm
okay,
looking
and
for.
that's fully within the council's decision. If we want to stack up a set of fines, fine the person, if they don't pay the fines, then lien against the property, then foreclose the lien. I think that's what that's not
That's
condemnation, that's foreclosing the
That's
lien.
what we did. We
Okay.
went ahead and had the lien and foreclosed on the lien.
Yes, if we foreclose on the lien, then it's just a matter of, there's a statutory prescribed process for how one does that. And I forget off the top of my head exactly how long it takes, but I think it's some relatively short period of time. You have to give them the opportunity to pay first. If they don't pay, then you can foreclose.
I would say, and then I'm going to let the board discuss this, I would say that I really don't want to do anything at all until we have an entire process that spells out every one of the single items that we've said. I want somebody to be able to go in, pick up a piece of paper that said, here's everything, here's the amount, here's the timeline, here's what I have to do to comply. And if I go through this whole thing, then at the end of 6 months, whatever it is, at some point in time, this is really the last day. I mean, we have people that wait for the day before 5 years to pay their property taxes. I
And
know, because the city's been
that's their
trying to
right.
buy one of them for years.
And unfortunately, and to some extent, that's unfortunately their right. They can wait 5 years, and then we can't force the county to sell it out from underneath them. And the same thing here. If they wait till the last minute for the time to pay the fine, then pay the fine. We can't force them to sell the property.
And that's okay.
As long as they pay the fines.
I don't really want to force anybody to sell any property. It's just there's got to be a way to break this stalemate of nothing.
And the other option that can be done, again, in the right case, is the abatement process, where we do an inspection process, figure out what the problems are, identify the problems, demand that they fix them, they don't fix them, go in and do it ourselves, get a warrant from the court, to an abatement warrant that lets us go in and fix the issues, then fix it up. And that could be, in the rare case, it would be a demolition warrant to demolish what's there. Some of the properties we've talked about, I think, are appropriate for that, some aren't. Others would be a matter of abating the issues or fixing what needs to be fixed, and then lien the property owner for the costs, and then foreclose the lien if they don't pay.
How long would it take to complete
That process could take,
this process for us to come up and say, here's the ABCs, and here's the time, and here's the fees, and we're done? And what would be a best date to notify the building owners with an entire process that is clearly spelled out on every single level of action? Because one of the things I've found to be problematic with these is we go ahead, we do the ordinance, we haven't clearly wrestled with all of the different problems. And then when we get down, we go to council and there's an appeal, and it's like, okay, we're not going to do this. And I don't want to see that happen anymore. What I want to see happen is they adopt it, and we're clearly all behind it, and clearly we have the law. And hopefully, if we do that, we'll clearly get the buy-in, and it will incentivize people to not hold junky, ratty, nasty buildings on the avenue for 25 years. So what do we think? 3 months? Is that what we're looking for?
I mean, I think we could do it faster if desired. It's a matter of priorities. Does this trump other priorities?
Well,
I'll look to city manager.
There is a problem, Mr. Clark.
So you're talking about the amount of time that we need to present an owner with a program, or the time that we need to execute the program once presented?
No, I
Or
don't
no,
know.
the time to have the program all set.
To have, the time we would need to have the program presented to the council for them to adopt and embrace it and give the go to enforce it. Because I think that's what we're missing, because it's going to take a while to get it. They're going to look at it. Everybody's going to have their own 2 cents in what needs to be done. It's going to come back and it'll be modified once or twice. Then when it's done, honestly, I don't want to see one of these fences and hedges go out and say stop and desist, and then I watch one of our council people I respect very much said, gee, there doesn't seem to be any public demand for this anymore, so maybe we shouldn't do it. I mean, I don't want to go through all this exercise, get to the council, and then we don't have a demand to do it, and we will have spent a lot of money. We spent 20 grand the last time on this. I don't want to spend a whole bunch more on this time. We do have a few buildings that I would like to see cleaned up, but if we don't have the will to follow our ordinances and we don't have everything properly done, I guarantee you we'll just never get there. So, I mean, I don't take any issue with the number of these. I am concerned with the occupancy. I am concerned because I know for every fire policy in California, we adopted the 1948 New York fire policies. It just says, once this building has been vacant for 90 days, the vandalism coverage is removed from your policy. So if somebody comes in, you got a herd of people living inside, guess what? You've got no coverage. Now, if they burn it down, of course, because you've got banks and institutions and you've got people with other insurable interests that need to be protected. But as far as vandalism, there's no coverage. So I'd like to look at this occupancies thing again. And with that, Dale, why don't you start off? We're going to go through and you add your 2 cents, and then I'm going to be quiet.
Well, just quickly, I wonder if anyone ever questions the aesthetic thing. It was one of the things that we can say, you know, a reason to call a building blighted. Does anyone ever question? Someone may think it's quaint, you know, rather than
I mean,
unsightly.
You can get in, certainly you can get in fights about aesthetics, but you can certainly get in fights about aesthetics, but for the most part, it's going to, in this context, it's going to be, does it look, not, you know, one style versus another, but rather, does it look good or not? Is it broken windows, peeling paint, peeling plaster, falling down buildings, falling down structure? That would be aesthetics that we could order to be fixed.
Well, and the code's pretty clear on landscaping, what is included in landscape and what is not, so.
Okay, thank you. That's really all I have right now.
Mr. Quillisi.
Well, if we could all turn to attachment B. I didn't realize it was as long as 14 pages because of my memo, okay.
What page?
Attachment B, page 1. There are a couple of comments there, and I'd like to get some
It's at the end.
feedback from the board on how we ought to do this. The first one speaks of building means any improved real property or portion thereof, and shall include the buildings and structures located on such improved real property. And I am concerned and would ask some advice from the city attorney, how can we go about declaring, say, a second unit as vacant without having to declare the primary unit as vacant at the same time, because they are structures on the same improved real property?
And I think the answer is we would add a sentence to this definition that would separate out that a property could have more than one building. And I think, you know, you could be
See, it
I
says,
think
and
part of that
shall
is picked
include
up
the
that-
buildings and structures located on such improved property. So that to me says, if I'm living in a primary unit, and I've got a second unit, and it's vacant, that my primary unit could also be defined as vacant under this section of the code. And clearly, that's not something we want.
Right, I think the way we do is we just divide up, building means, you could do it as building means any single structure on any improved real property, and then go on, designed or permitted to be used for dwelling or business purposes, and shall include one or more buildings and structures located on such improved property. I think that would fit that goal, but I agree with you that we shouldn't deem the second unit vacant if the first unit's vacant or vice versa. It should be a building-by-building basis.
Okay, I would recommend that you give us some language that makes that clear, that multiple buildings on the same piece of property are to be judged individually in terms of their vacancy. I think, is that the right kind of thought there?
That makes sense.
Yeah, okay. Second comment, under dangerous building, it says,
Your code?
I'm sorry?
Code? What number?
Oh, this is still on attachment B, page 1, bottom of the page.
Okay.
Comment 02 refers to the International Code Council International Property Management Code. And this, again, is part of my campaign to make things understandable to the general population. Is there a copy of that available in City Hall or online in City Hall for you to refer people to?
It isn't available online because it's not a public document. It's a proprietary document, but yes, we do have a copy available for review
Okay,
at
I just want.
City Hall.
I don't want to be told that I have a dangerous building but not know what that means. And so I added the words, a copy of the ICC, International Property Management Code, most recent edition, shall be maintained for public inspection at City Hall. Is that works for you?
It's the 2012, is based on the 2013 California Code.
Okay.
So that's the one we
How
would
about a
use right
face
now.
like that, Steve?
Pardon me?
How about if they cite that? with-
Yeah, well, I said most recent edition, but if we put in 2012, then next year when they come out with a new edition, then we need to change this again.
You're correct to leave it as the most recent edition.
Okay. Attachment B, page 2, I have recommended, where it says days means consecutive calendar days, I tried to change the deadlines in here from 5 days, sometimes 7 days, sometimes, and just make it really calendar days, because 5 days with a weekend, or especially a holiday weekend in between, isn't right. So I tried to change that. That was my comment. On evidence of vacancy, I would agree with the city attorney. We need to change the language here. Absence of furnishings and personal items shouldn't be a condition, an enabling condition of vacancy. A lot of houses are sold empty. I have acquired, on behalf of my corporation, commercial property, and it's always empty when you buy it and you move your own stuff in. So I would agree with including the suggested language in Mr. Summers' memo on that.
If I could make a
Yes, sir.
comment on it, since it's gone back and forth 3 or 4 times. The instance where that's referenced in 9/1502 is evidence of vacancy. In other words, as a condition. That's not, do not believe that there's anything in this section that requires enforcement as such. You are correct that on occasion, vacant buildings are not vacant, they're being sold, marketed, et cetera. But the reality of the situation is the absence of personal effects in a residence and the absence of business furnishings in a commercial enterprise, notwithstanding, are an invitation to certain elements of the community or the society to occupy, break in, use unlawfully. There's nothing in this ordinance that requires that condition to be maintained by the owner. It is simply indicated as an evidence, as in support of the enforcement. So,
I understand, and my contention is that an empty room is not an evidence of vacancy.
but it may be.
It may be.
Okay, and that's all, as I read it, that it's is implied. It's an additional, it's an addition to the other conditions, so.
Okay.
And Mr. Summers, if you got a grasp on that, you're going to get us clarification?
Yeah, at the moment, these are worded independent of each other, so that one could use the present text to be the absence of furnishings and personal items consistent with residential habitation by itself as evidence, with no other evidence of vacancy, and that's what concerns me. I think if you had that plus an accumulation of newspapers plus past utility notices, several of these together, then it'd be okay to have that as part of your evidence of vacancy, but if it's just by itself, and that's the way this code section is worded, then it presents an issue in my mind. I think two ways to capture
so-
that. One would be to, as I recommended, delete it. Two would be to add before the final comma, and in addition to the foregoing, the absence of furnishings and personal items consistent with residential habitation.
How about if we just took out that, if we took out in the first line, on its own or, if we just said, any condition that combined with other conditions present would lead a reasonable person to think the property's vacant. I don't know.
That would mean that we would need at least two conditions to find something is vacant, which I think, for the most part, we'd be able to show. That seems reasonable.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's do that then. Let's, on the first line of the definition, evidence of vacancy, take out that, take out the words on its own or. And that means the absence of furnishings or personal items by itself would not be sufficient for a finding of vacancy, but in combining with other things, it could be. Great. Down in legally occupied, I suggest we delete under subsection A, at least 5 days per week, because there are businesses here in town that are regular businesses that are not open 5 days a week. And they're not dangerous buildings, and they're not vacant or anything else. And so I would suggest we just delete that requirement. Let me see. I added send a letter means by U.S. Postal Service. This is on page 3. Send by U.S. Postal Service certified mail with return receipt. So later in the section where we talk of the process, if we have to send a letter, that's what it would mean. I would recommend. On vacant means and for a multi-use or occupancy building or structure, I have real trouble with this. I suggested adding the unoccupied portion of a building. We certainly don't want to have a commercial building 40% of which, or 60% of which is occupied and has good business in it, and 40% which is up for rent. We don't want the whole building condemned as vacant. So I'm struggling with that, and my suggestion was adding those words.
And that would have been my building a while back. Lost a huge escrow. We lost the ambulance from upstairs. Hospital had moved into the annex. The birthing people had moved out. The insurance guy and then the other people moved out. So yeah, so we can get these things that are well under 65%. And we still, I guess for this strict definition, it is not 65% full now. And it's been actively full and actively been used for the 20 years I've been here in town. So I'm sure we can come up with other examples.
Okay, 1503A2, I would agree with Mr. Summers, page 4 of his memo, talk about applicable health and safety codes. And ready for occupancy, though, is a very squishy phrase to me. As I said, houses are sold empty. Commercial properties are most frequently sold empty, that is, without furnishings. And so I'm not sure what ready for occupancy means. It could mean empty rooms that you can bring office furniture into. I don't think it's the seller's obligation to provide office furniture in a commercial building, for example. They can simply lease it as is. And so Mr. Summers' words there and on 1503B, the same, I think. Under rehabilitated for occupancy, take that out. But I have also added in 1503 that the owner and the trustee and the beneficiary, I think, should be jointly and severally responsible for these things, because if a bank has a mortgage on a piece of property, they're going to have an interest in that property being maintained and not dangerous and all those things. And that extra pressure on a property owner could be useful in terms of bringing us to compliance. And 1503C, I think I just moved that from somewhere. I think that was in somewhere else already and just moved it to a different paragraph.
I think that was in 1504.
Okay. I couldn't remember where it went. Yes, it was in 1504 at the end. Okay. 1504 would require the community development. This is now renamed as identification and evaluation of vacant buildings and notifications, and this is where I tried to put in a workable process for actually getting us to what Chair Daddy talked of as taking people to court as a last resort. I'm asking the CDD perform periodic patrols at least every 60 days on city streets to identify potential vacant buildings, solicit public input, the director evaluate each noted or reported potential vacant building and produce a written finding, and send a letter within 7 days of the date of the written finding to the owner or beneficiary or trustee of each designated building, setting forth in detail by explicit code reference those items and actions required by the city to bring the vacant building into compliance. I would further recommend that we have the property owner / trustee / beneficiary produce the abatement plan. I don't know that it's going to be different for each piece of property, and I don't see that it's, my opinion, a good use of city staff time to produce different abatement plans for each different piece of property when the property owners should be responsible for the abatement. The city staff can review an abatement plan and say yes or no to it, but I think that it should be the responsibility of the property owner to do that. And so I've said they have to send a letter that outlines, citing in detail those items and actions required by the city to bring the property into compliance, including but not limited to securing the building, registering the building, monitoring the building, and reporting to the CDD, and correcting any conditions that have caused the vacant building to be designated as abandoned, dangerous, or substandard, and providing an abatement plan to the director as defined in 1512. And provide suspense dates, which I have included there, securing the building 7 days, registering the building 14 days, initiating monitoring and reporting 14 days, and obtaining necessary or required building permits and whatever, 90 days. And then I just changed some of the dates I changed 10 to 14 in 1505. In 1507, 1507B2, there's a reference to Title IX, Chapter 1 of this code, and I can't find any reference to secure or to unlawful entry in Title IX, Chapter 1. Perhaps I missed it. But if we are going to have those terms, they should either be in 1502 or if somewhere else, then they should be properly cited in 1507B2. And I don't know the answer to that one, but it's not there. And I, again, in 1507B3, I did not find any reference to substandard or nuisance in Title IX, Chapter 1, Article 5. Substandard does appear in Title IX, Chapter 1, Article 4, but no definition is provided. The word is included in that section. And so those are administrative cleanups in the code that I don't feel qualified to make. I wouldn't know where to put the corrections unless we just define those terms in 1502. And that would be fine too. But we don't have definitions in the code right now that I could find for those. I suggested in 1507C that a fee be imposed on a monthly basis for a vacant building, monitoring fee. I don't think you said, Sherry, we don't have monitoring fees right now. Yeah, okay. In 1507G, I asked about the hearing officer, director or the hearing officer. We covered that topic already. Section 9-1508 should be reserved. There is none in the code right now. I should have included that, I'm sorry. I agree with Member Hanson that in 1509B, line 4, company should say property owner / trustee / beneficiary responsibility to bring the property into compliance. And I've added a 1509D to talk about failure to contract for a local property management and initiate monitoring, and that's covered again elsewhere. Let me see. Okay, 1510C2, I'm still not clear on continuing compliance. I don't think we're going to require people with occupied buildings to constantly upgrade their buildings if building codes change, and I don't think we should do the same thing. I don't think we should do that to vacant building owners either.
May I ask a question?
Yeah.
Certainly don't want to embarrass anybody. But when we talk about paint and peeling and chipping, we have an iconic example. It's at the farmer's market. It's the back of the garage with the lapboard. That is the most painted building I've seen in the entire community. And it would seem to be that I'm a little bit conflicted. If the building is vacant, it needs to be painted and look nice. And if it's dilapidated and occupied, it's okay. And so when we get into that painting, how do we, or do we even want to go there? Is it okay if it looks like a dump as long as there's somebody in there? Because that building is the building that Ms. Hanson has out of her office at her desk. It is that great big white garage that is right on the property line there, and right in that corner for farmers market. So I don't want to enforce every rule on everybody all the time. But again, do we have a difference if I'm concerned about making one comply in the same condition and the other one doesn't comply? It just, I don't want to make this thing so heavy-handed that people just say, can't do it, just give up, I'm not going to do it. I don't want to create the problem by trying to define the process. So if you have some words of wisdom, Mr. Quillisi, if you have some words of wisdom, if somebody does.
Well, I would agree with you completely that occupied buildings ought to be held to at least the same standard as unoccupied or vacant buildings. But the latter is our concern tonight. And we ought to suggest to city council that the former be taken up as a separate topic and made rational with anything that we do with vacant buildings.
And that would be my comment, that requiring occupied buildings to be improved is a separate conversation.
Oh, absolutely.
And a tough one.
Certainly.
1510C2, I would agree with Mr. Summers' comments on maintenance of the building and continuing compliance. I think that needs to be health and safety, and it's not dangerous, and a few of the other things that he said in the memo. And then in each of these, like 1511, I added G, which provides failure to secure a vacant building within 7 days. Then the city will go ahead and contract the local property management company to secure the building at the expense of the corporation or out-of-area beneficiary. The abatement plan, 1512, this is where I suggest that the property owner or trustee or beneficiary be responsible for constructing the plan, that the city only be required to cite those portions of the code that are violated and then review a plan rather than having to create a plan for each vacant building that is so designated. And that's probably a policy kind of thing, but that's the way I think it should be. So, you know, create an abatement plan for review by the city community development department, rather than the department having to create a new abatement plan each time there's a vacant building evaluated.
Wouldn't he tend to make it easy on himself?
Well, that's why we would have review by the CDD to make sure that the abatement plan is adequate. But and Mr. Stewart, Mr. Clark, you tell me, is that less of a burden on city staff? I think in terms of evaluation and noticing, the work has to be done by the department. But then you've got prepare a plan and evaluate its adequacy. And I'm thinking that there's more work involved in preparing the plan than in evaluating its adequacy. I don't know.
It's kind of hard to say, because I think the property owner needs very specific direction as to what needs to be done on their property. So it would take a certain amount of effort to get to that point. And then would they regurgitate that back in terms of an abatement plan? and
Okay,
then
you're
we'd
saying
review it?
effort beyond citing the specifics of the code that are violated?
Well, I think, I mean, in my view, probably what would happen is that there'd have to be an inspection of the property as part of this.
That would
And
be
the-
part of the evaluation,
and the-
sure.
Yeah, and the inspection would yield a list of things that need to be done to make the building habitable as a
Or
general.
to make it compliant with this.
Right,
Yeah, sure.
habitable in terms of the code.
Yeah.
And to me, that kind of is what the abatement plan is. You know, if the roof has holes in it, the roof needs to be repaired. If the wall isn't structurally sound, the wall needs to be made structurally sound. So I'm really just thinking off the top of my head in response to the comment you made. I'm not sure which is less of a burden on staff. But my concern would be, we are going to want them to go to a greater degree to make the building compliant than they're likely to want to do voluntarily. So there's going to be a push-pull in the process.
Yeah, in most cases, I would think that would probably be mailed out to the owner and the beneficiary, because I know from a banking standpoint, if the beneficiary gets involved, a lot of these issues will be taken care of. You know,
Yes. Or property reverts to the bank and nasty stuff like that. Mr. Stewart, what's your feeling on this? Do you feel better citing the code and reviewing a plan, or citing the code and preparing a plan?
I agree with the city manager's comments that I think the process would need to start with the city putting together a comprehensive list of deficiencies.
Right?
at the point of if we are getting a sense that they're wanting to work with us, I think it would be reasonable for them to respond back to us in regards to what timeframes they plan on complying with these various issues. And if they drop the ball on that, then we would move on to a next enforcement step in that regard. So,
But for you, preparing a plan or reviewing a plan that someone else put together as a result of your citation?
I would say that there's probably less work for us to go ahead and just prepare the plan and then move forward with that.
And then argue back and forth on it at that point?
Yeah.
Because you're gonna have to do both anyway.
Mike. Can't hear you at home unless you.
I'm sorry. You're gonna have to do both anyway. I mean, you're gonna have to wear both shoes anyway, so.
Clearly, I mean, there's gonna be push and pull, as the city manager indicated, but the city needs to have clear in its mind what the minimum requirements are, and then we can move forward with how to abate that.
Okay, what else?
Well, so how do we change 1512A then? Because right now, the way I changed the wording, if you're looking at attachment B, I changed it from the director shall prepare a written abatement plan to the trustee or the owner trustee beneficiary shall prepare in response to the written findings by the director and a written abatement plan. And so it's the opinion of city staff that we're better off to have the director, through surrogates like Mr. Stewart, prepare an abatement plan?
That's my gut response, yes.
I think we understand the intent, and Matt can work on some language that fits what we're
Okay.
trying to do.
Well, if Mr. Summers can clean that up to,
I mean, I think the existing language, I think, matches that. The director shall prepare a written abatement plan for all vacant buildings within the city. And then it goes on, I think we're fine to add, your
Okay,
modification to the
so
second
we'll
sentence is
just-
fine.
just leave 1512A as it stands.
I think the second sentence, the addition at the end about a schedule is good to have. I think that should be added, should be, kept in place. And you could also keep the,
Okay, I get you, okay. So we'll set the first sentence,
yeah. And then maintain the change to the second sentence, and then on the
saying
third
the second
sentence.
sentence, and then the third sentence and fourth goes away.
Yeah, because we already have the divisions, we'll have
The
it
third
fixed
and fourth
ourselves.
sentences that I added
Yeah,
would go away. And then we step B,
You want to leave B?
pardon me?
I said, do you want to leave B then, since
I
you've-
think B needs to stay in 1512B.
and on B, we should set it, and,
And it should
We
be
should connect
owner,
it back
trustee,
to-
beneficiary.
correct. And we should connect it back to which method of service. Right now, it's personal service or else regular first-class mail with return receipt as opposed to certified mail. I know that's a minor nit, but it's worth clarifying.
Yeah, certified, United States certified mail. Return receipt requested, right,
We
okay.
need to put something in about inspection.
Well, as long as we get a receipt. We didn't get a receipt at the end on one of the
Yeah.
little small technicalities.
And then I think we're going to set 1512C, because that goes back to the original intent of city staff doing the plan, okay? And then 1512F goes away in the proposed amendment. Okay, 1514 should be fees related to a vacant property shall be set by resolution of the city council, rather than the fee for registering. It should be all of the fees that are related to vacant property, or vacant buildings, excuse me, a vacant building. And then we need to go look at, that's the last of my suggested changes. Attachment B, page 12, though, has a proposed addition to the city fee schedule, and that needs to be run through the city manager and staff to see what those real costs are, to make sure that we get the right numbers in there. I wanted to, those under 9-1512, the last two items in the fee schedule, go away because we are now having the city staff retain the responsibility for developing an abatement plan, and so there's no fee for contracting with someone else to do it, and no fine for failure to do it, right, on the property owners.
Right.
Would there be a cost recovery, a staff cost recovery? I mean,
That's how, yeah,
we
so,
can cost recover everything, we just can't exceed cost.
that's right. So we have to do an analysis to determine how much time and by what classification of employee.
Okay.
And we should add a fee for developing the abatement plan. And that would fall under 1512, I guess. Yes. And so I would recommend that we ask the city manager and staff to develop those numbers for us.
Question?
Yes, sir.
Why is cost recovery required? I thought that the purposes of a fine are punitive.
Oh, a fine is separate from a fee.
Well, which fees
Cost
are?
recovery
which-
applies to a fee.
Right, which fees are you referring to?
Well, there's the registration fee. There could be a fine for failure to register. There could be fees for monthly monitoring and reporting. There could be a
Yeah.
contract for doing that monitoring and
This
reporting.
is once again where it's being done by the owner, the monitoring and reporting?
If the monitoring and reporting is done by the owner, that cost is on the owner.
Right, so the question at
If
that.
the owner fails to do it and the city and the city winds up doing it through a third party,
It's not a cost recovery, then it's a fine. It's a continued fine,
well,
an ongoing fine.
We can,
in fact, that's what I have in
Make it
here under
simple that way,
1509.
because if- Then you don't get
Yeah.
involved in the complexity of cost recovery.
That's
The
right, it's
intent
not a
is
fee.
The intent is punitive because the city's having to do something on account of someone else's failure to do something.
Right. That's why under 1509, contracting with a local property management company for monitoring and reporting is $250 plus the cost of the contract.
We've had an issue for 5 years with enforcement of this ordinance.
But there have been no fines attached to any violations.
Exactly. And at this point, we're trying to not only clarify that process, but simplify it. Because the vagueness, the lack of some of these key elements has apparently prevented the situation from being something that would be enforceable otherwise.
Okay.
So, having said that, how these fines are characterized versus fines and fees makes a significant amount of difference.
I would agree. Annual vacant building registration fee is a fee. Failure to register is a fine. Okay.
How about if we have staff file fine-tune that and comb that over, delineate that from us. Tell us where we need to be, because again, I think that, and I hope everybody else does, the full cost of this really needs to be borne by the people that have ignored this ordinance since December 9th of 2010. It's not that they haven't had time, it's just they've chosen to ignore it.
Well, and there's also something else should be taken into consideration. It actually costs money to maintain something vacant. There's no revenue stream appended to it.
There's an opportunity
You're
cost.
still- Well, no, you're still paying taxes, ostensibly insurance. There are overhead soft costs. The reality of the situation is it costs someone more than it does to have it occupied with a rent, with some value being conferred to the property to offset those costs.
Sure.
So you're dealing with a class of a member of the community, members of the class of members of the community who can afford to own real property, maintain its overhead costs, which are deemed, I believe, at law to be a burden and not a benefit, and yet still maintain them in a vacant condition. This is a sort of unique class of the community. Hence what apparently the issue has also been, these are typically speaking not what, shall we say, folks they're property owners. They are not destitute members of this community. They are oftentimes substantial property owners. So let's be clear about that. And the intent of this is to be inclusive relative to the types of properties that we are attempting to manage to the benefit of the community, and not be as concerned about the particularities of, I'm not saying not to be fair, but the emphasis needs to be on that the folks that are maintaining vacant and abandoned buildings, in many cases, well, we have an example of a corporation in our community. We've had examples in the past of corporations in relative to perhaps some automobile dealerships. The reality of the situation is this is a very distinctive and, for the most part, narrow class of individuals who are able to afford to maintain a
Leave
vacant
something
building.
fallow, yes.
Yes.
Sure. Yeah, I would ask then, if this is a proper way to do it, Mr. Daddy, that the city attorney and city manager advise us on this proposed addition to the city fee schedule. I presume that the fee schedule can have both fees and fines in it. And there are certain
Yes.
there are certain transactions that are necessary, like a registration. And there are other transactions that may be necessary, like engaging a property management firm to do monitoring and reporting, that to me are fees, perhaps in addition to the cost of a contract, that are deserving of cost recovery by the city. And there are other issues like failure to do those things that should be construed as fines for failure. And so if you can sort that out, then I think we've got something that maybe we can move forward with here.
Thank you. Any
I would clarify that with one comment.
Sure.
A voluntary participation, when you apply for a building permit, when you apply to register your vacant abandoned building, is a voluntary application process, registration application, same, ostensibly, for all intents and purposes. I'm considering them to be the same. Anything else should be, for purposes of this ordinance, a fine. Because it's not going to be, voluntary. If someone is failing to monitor, if someone is failing to contract with a local property manager, if there are work that has to be done by the city because the owner is refusing to do so, that should be a fine, not a fee.
Okay, I respectfully disagree. If there's a transaction that's required of city staff, whether it's a registration or engaging a monitoring and reporting firm, whatever, I think that's a transaction that's deserving of cost recovery. If there is, in addition, failure by the property owner to do those things that are the property owner's responsibility, then, in my opinion, a fine is appropriate for that, which is why I listed contracting with a property management firm or failure to contract. Contracting for securing a vacant building and failure to secure a vacant building.
And what purpose, or what circumstances would the city be contracting with a local property management firm on behalf of the owner when the owner is not voluntarily participating in that initiative?
I'm not sure it would be on behalf of the owner. It's on behalf of the citizenry to bring a particular piece of property into compliance.
Hence my characterization of that transaction, it should be a fine
There
because
is
we're having to
a
do something.
Third
What do you
category.
do?
There's three categories at issue here. There's fees for applications, fees for registration. Those are clearly fees that have to be cost justified. Next is recovery of costs incurred by the city, albeit not voluntarily, but incurred by the city recovering through a lien process. That would be contracting with the property management company for preparing, maintaining the property. If we went ahead and used an abatement warrant
If
to
we found that
fix the
was
property up,
Right.
it would be contracting for that service. A classic example is in communities that have fire clearance requirements for brush. If you don't clear your brush by the right period of time, the fire department will do it for you and send you a bill. If you don't pay the bill, they lien your property. That's it still has to be cost justified, but it's a lien recovery. It's a forced fee, basically. And then the last category is pure fines.
My interest is keeping it simple.
Yep.
Okay, when you have different classes, the more different classes you have, the more complexity you have in your ordinance, that's all. And I agree.
And staff will make a recommendation so we can forward this on to the council. Okay, we have one last item, I believe, or do you have any more comments
Well,
on this?
Attachment B, page 13 and 14, we can maybe take this offline, but I had submitted to Mr. Clark when I found out he was out of town for a while. I resubmitted to Mr. McClary a series of a couple dozen questions about vacant buildings, and I was hoping to have a response tonight, but I can see we don't have that yet.
We're waiting.
Yeah, but I'm still anticipating answers to 26 questions having to do with vacant buildings.
Okay, and we have at least 26 more questions to go with these that we're going to be
All of
waiting
that.
for the process and procedures. Okay, so staff has got a lot of work cut out, and it would be helpful if we could get this back at least 8-10 days ahead of time so we could look at it, add some things, see if we could make sure that we have those things or things we don't have back so we can get that done. Again, we've got 26 questions that haven't been answered.
Also,
So we need to start making these meetings where we've really got everything we need and we can just say then, this is now done. It's
now we
not going to
hand-
be
yeah,
back.
Hand a complete document and a recommendation. And along that line, attachment C, I think we agreed, evidence of vacancy, we're taking the absence of furnishings off that checklist now.
You're going to have to get their attention. The answer is yes, but we're
Yes.
going to have to wait.
Bob, I have a couple of items. but
Sure.
What I'll do is, I'll just go ahead and send you some suggestions that I have down. One of them happens to be on 9/15/11 F. We're talking about the signs of 24-hour contact telephone numbers.
Right.
And just one case here, I was looking at it, and I thought, well, you know, it says that it would be placed in the window at the front of the business. In some cases, the windows aren't really visible from the street.
Mondays are good.
So I would suggest
You can't
that,
put up chain link fencing
Or
and
the
put
11's open.
put a sign on that chain link
That's-
fencing because chain link fencing is
no.
specifically prohibited by the code.
yeah, I was just, I was thinking maybe you could put the contact number and maybe the email on the sign rather than on the front window. For instance, the bowling alley, I don't know if you would be able to see the front window from the street.
Yeah, I agree with you. That's 1511F.
Would, once they
The
take the chain link
posting,
fence
the
down.
posting
Yeah,
should
with a
be,
pair of binoculars maybe, but not,
yeah, the sign with that information should be prominently posted so that it's visible to passersby.
right.
Okay, so that's 91511F,
F.
Correct.
okay? That needs to be changed.
Any way we could put abatement plan / or progress report, just to make it a little bit better?
The progress report would talk about progress against the abatement plan.
Okay. Okay.
I think of them as two separate things. Is that,
Or plan of action, or
yeah?
/ plan of action?
Yeah, I think it would be two different things. The abatement plan is what you have to do. The progress report is how are you doing on doing it.
The progress report is avoiding the fine, I think.
Yeah.
And it might be the case if they do, I mean, it's possible that some of these property owners will actually do what we want. They're not,
Yeah.
it's possible, although perhaps not likely.
The posting, though, Mr. Summer, was in 1511 F lines 2 through about 7 or 8. Talks about the information that should be posted, I think, is correct, but I think Mr. Farmer is correct that if you put a sign on the inside of a window at the bowling alley, nobody would be able to read it from the street. So some other legal language that says prominently posted, or that thought, I think would be,
I mean, I think that's captured by the middle sentence.
Third line from the bottom.
The posting shall be placed in the interior of a window or secured to the exterior or on a stake of sufficient size to support the posting in a location that is visible from the street. I think that the language we have now captures this goal of ensuring that the sign be visible from the street, but it could be clarified to make that
okay,
extra
well,
obvious.
on line 6, then, if we said interior, an interior posting shall be placed such and such, exterior posting must be so-and-so. Right now, it seems to require both, or I'm not sure.
Well, I guess as I read it, there's 2 ors here, so it's 3 different options: interior, exterior, or stake.
Counsel, could I make a suggestion?
Sure.
Because of the unique configuration and the placement of each one of these buildings, some are right on the sidewalk, some are a quarter of a mile away, that the sign be posted in a prominent location to be determined by the city building official.
That would work.
Give, we've got people here with good eyesight, we've got people with good judgment that know this process and procedure. That's something, again, we're gonna look at some of these things, and kind of like our intersections that are blocked here. So I think that really needs to be a building official, because they can go out with a building official, they can both look at it, and then they can figure out what's gonna work for the community.
Sounds good.
Okay, anything else on this item before we move on to the last item?
Last item.
Tom?
Different Tom.
I'm sorry?
The question was,
Item 7.
okay, yeah, I do. So, you have anything else further?
No.
Okay. I had a couple of questions. Mr. Summer, in your summary, you start off with, as asked, we've reviewed the vacant building ordinance in the Ojai Municipal Code, et cetera. By whom were you asked?
Pull your mic a little closer.
Excuse me, I was sitting away from it, you're absolutely right. I'll restate it.
The city council asked me.
Excuse me?
The city council.
Okay, all right. All right, and is the cost for this an analysis within the retainer agreement, or is it an addition to it?
This was on top of the retainer, if I remember
Okay,
right.
so it's additional professional services. Okay. Would you like to second the comment by Chair Daddy that in the course of looking at things, I think it would be helpful to have your comments extend to the proposed fee schedule as well, simply because that is the means of enforcement.
That is the stick.
And relative to enforcement, I know there was a comment by Mr. Clark earlier regarding hiring of outside counsel or an enforcement expert for this. I disagree with that on several levels. One is that as an attenuation of the adoption of any enforcement process, because you've got to go through an RFP, interviews, hiring, and orientation process, the potentiality of an individual's hired as being not familiar with the community, staff, or the city's mechanisms. I often use the term inclusivity. This is an enforcement ordinance, and I would like it to be inclusive as well. In other words, of as many of the conditions and the methods and means of enforcement as possible in a manner that can be implemented, adopted by the council, and here's the hard part, enforced by staff. Because the issue, as good as this can be made, this ordinance, is if there are gaps in it, it's not going to be enforced. If there's questions about who's enforcing it, the means of enforcement, and I sure don't want it to become we can't enforce it until we hire somebody to enforce it. Because as you just commented, at least two of you just commented, we have enough people. There's not a whole bunch of these. It's not a full-time job. It can take place over a period of time, but it does need to take root and be effectively enforced. And that, of course, will be something that will be forthcoming ostensibly from council. The larger issue from my perspective is, I know also, Mr. Clark, you made reference to there's been some efforts in the past to enforce the existing ordinance with owners of vacant or abandoned buildings in the community. The problem with that is because of confidentiality approaches, nobody knows when this has happened, nobody knows where it's happened, and nobody knows why it was not successful.
And other than registration fees, there were no financial penalties for not complying.
So, and the bottom line at this point is, I'm not imputing that best faith efforts were not engendered. I think that there was a good possibility. There were all sorts of reasons why they were not effective, but I do want to bring attention to what I characterize as, for certain ordinances, it seems like we have had a difficult time enforcing them, to the point that I would characterize as a aura of unenforceability, or a lack of will to enforce becomes associated with that particular ordinance. And I would not like our recommendations, should they be adopted by the council, to fall prey to those set of circumstances as so many others have.
That's why it's important that, in addition to updating the code, we update the fee and fine schedule, because even if, under the current conditions, city staff could be as aggressive as anyone would wish in terms of enforcing the code, and property owners at the moment are free to say, well, if I don't comply, what are you going to do? And there's nothing to do right now. So That could lead to a lack of enthusiasm about enforcing if there's no stick behind the enforcement mechanism.
Or gaps.
Or gaps, whatever.
Or
Yeah,
gaps.
Sure.
Mr. Ulrich, what other items would you?
I just had two short ones. One was relative that I'd like to re-emphasize on section 91503. The removal of a clause where failure to keep property ready for occupancy. I would object to that, since keeping a property ready for occupancy, as vague as that may seem to be, if it's not maintained, that confirms and perpetuates vacancy and potentially blight, and is difficult to distinguish from abandonment, and may be a direct threat. Maybe, since the most powerful components of the police power of the city is a direct threat to health and safety of licensees or trespassers. In other words, what I'm referring to is, if something's not maintained on the inside, the interior, it becomes an attractive nuisance. Even if the exterior is absolutely beautiful, that does not prevent folks from being attracted to its vacancy.
But I don't see us requiring that a residential property owner maintain a residential property with personal items and furnishings inside to avoid being called vacant.
Once again, this is an indicator, not a requirement, okay?
I think we left.
Okay, and then I'll move to 91510C2.
We left that in 1502.
Okay. Maintenance, including interiors.
Where are you now?
91510C2.
10C2. Yeah, I thought we had agreed to remove the language in continuing compliance and substitute the language that had to do with health and safety and not dangerous or substandard.
Okay, from a maintenance perspective, okay.
From a maintenance
I'm
perspective.
good with that.
Yeah,
All
good.
right.
Thank God. Okay, let's go on to the last item. Would we pass these down to the last three participants on the right? Mr. Ulrich, do you have one of these? Mr.
I do.
Farmer,
I do.
One of these? Do either of you have one of these or need one? Okay, this is a sample of we're talking about. Let me go to what it actually is. It says, for the benefit of everyone, item 7 talks about handouts and checklists. We've talked about an awful lot about checklists and an awful lot about making things transparent and an awful lot about putting all the language in so people can actually understand. I brought up a point with the council half a dozen years ago that said the city of Florida sued the counties and the city, the state of Florida sued the counties and cities and prohibited them from writing laws, codes, and ordinances were above the average man's understanding. Mm-hmm. And, thank God, I didn't think they'd lead in anything but sunshine. So when I take a look at this first one, this is just absolutely incorrect. And I know because I've got my permit where I was a victim of this. And we're going to talk about some of this, but block walls 3.6, and then we talk about retaining walls. The average citizen is not going to understand the difference between retaining and block. Retaining walls are actually the 3.6.
Question.
Yes.
Is this a current city document?
It's indicative of all the city documents.
Or this is
I can't tell you. I can't tell you what we've got in the holder there.
Okay, I've not seen this before, and so I wanted to know, is this
Good.
something we're relying on or not?
Because people have taken these for years, still have them, and they rely upon these things.
This is on the website. I've been trying to get it pulled off because it's not complete.
It's not compliant, it's not legal, it's not accurate.
Retaining walls are a subset of block walls.
Retaining,
They're
walls that
different.
retain 3'6",
Yeah.
not
The
block
numbers
walls.
may be wrong, too.
The numbers are wrong. We get in on a lot of things. I mean, if we're going to put these things out, let's be helpful. You can have electricity in a shed as long as it's not more than 24 volts. I mean, we have a lot of these things in here. And what I would like to see us do when we make some changes is we had a long fight over this particular thing, which was a change. And it was the underlying greed is for this current city code. And we did a format. And what we finally ended up doing is we color coded it. And I think the color coding is a good way to go because it says, here's the code, here's what we're going to do, here's what we're proposing changing. And so we have a number of items where we can make these things easier for people. But the boards and the commissions have all expressed some uncomfortableness and dissatisfaction with the way a number of these are written. And what I would really like you to do is find a way to charge the commissions with certain of these handouts and things. If you were to go look for a fence and you just wanted to put in a fence, what it would tell you is, depending on the zoning, depending on the acreage, your fence would be back no higher than 3 feet, either 10 feet, 20 feet, or 40 feet. And if you were on a corner, you had to have a 25-foot radius. And if you're here, you have to do this. So we have all kinds of different rules. I think we've got about 8 different rules for fences and building material under trees. And here I am trying to do my grapes, and I understand that. And if you're going to put a fence under a tree between February and August, you have to come into the city, and the city has to clear those trees for bird nests. And I wasn't really sure why, but every time I went to clip the top of my grapes, I'd find these beautiful little bird nests, some with eggs. The one last night had a jackpot of a half a dozen birds that weren't ready to fly. I understand that. What my problem is, I don't believe people wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to do whatever I want, and I'm not going to have any rules, and I'm just going to have a big fist fight. I think what happens, it is difficult to get the information together. So when we look at a property on Palomar, one 6-foot wall's back 40 feet, one's back 20 feet. And I looked at it and I couldn't figure out what it was. I called Dale. I said, how big is that property? She goes, it's 0.95 of an acre. Guess what? 20 feet. 1/0 of an acre next door, 40 feet. And so we have these things, and I would hope what we could do is we could get these learned people that know building and know zoning and have authority in different areas. And I would hope that when we start doing these permits.
Chair
and
Daddy, maybe I
Yes.
can help out a little
Yeah,
bit here.
please.
What you're giving me right here is inadequate. This is not good work. There's no doubt about it. And we're in the process of updating our website, and these are coming off, okay? Because they cause more confusion than good. So I appreciate that comment, and we're working on that. The city council has given us funding to hire some additional clerical support. To one of their responsibilities is to help us update our handouts. And what I've put together in your packet tonight is just a very rough sample of some of the handouts that we have started to put together. My goal is that when we get this more to a point of a final product on the building, clearly strictly building handouts, I will bring that back to to this board and just to have you take a look at it and see what you feel is if it's readable and understandable. And, I'll be the first one to admit that what we do is very technical, but I'm trying to put it into more of a layman language so it's understandable, and I would seek your help to help with that so that we don't get too overly technical. But we're actually working on close to 50 handouts right now that are related to some of them to planning, fences, issues, some of them very technical, like what I've given you in regards to what the plan requirements for tenant improvements are. As somebody comes in and wants to do tenant improvements, and they don't want to hire a design professional to help them on that, we'll be able to give them this handout. The other handout I've given to you is on how to properly install a HVAC unit in an attic and what the criteria there is. Another very popular one is the burial depth of various types of electrical, plumbing, gas piping, the systems, how to install sheetrock, what we need on a set of plans for a simple addition handout that we're working on. So these are still in the development stage. We've put a lot of effort into trying to put these together, and we are still working on these handouts. The water heater one is a very important one. Utilize that a lot of how to properly install a water heater and the appropriate strapping and so on. So we're in the process of working on this, and we will continue to work on this. I'm thankful that the city council has provided some assistance for us to get the typing and the city seals and all of those kinds of things on the documents, and we'll be bringing those back. But it's been an effort that needs to have been done for a very long time here in Ojai. There's no question about that. And in our staff in the community development realizes that, and we are making time to move this forward. So I want to let you know that it's being worked on. The city manager is very supportive of us doing this, and he asks me from time to time how we're coming along on that. And being that our volume of work has been quite heavy here lately, we haven't been able to spend a whole lot of time on this, but we are continuing to work on this. So I want to reassure you that we understand the need for this and we're working on this.
Okay, and I have a special request, and maybe I can get Chester to step up to the mic in just a moment and make a comment. I'm putting you on the line. I would really appreciate, with the three, we have three different building organizations, the BAB, the HPC, and the Planning Commission. I would hope that if you're going to work on 50 of these, a master list goes out to each one of the three building board and commissions and designate whose oversight that is, where the titles are, where it should be. And I would urge, before you go much further at all, that you send these to the different boards, let them look at the thing, let them see if they have an appetite, they've run into problems, they have discussions, they've been over some of these issues before, and allow them to weigh in to assist, because they can take a lot of the heavy loading. Now, the thing you're looking at here, I asked the mayor 18 years ago if it wouldn't be possible to clean up some of this stuff. And we sit here 18 years later, and we are. I really think the Planning Commission needs an opportunity to look at those zoning things. I really think HPC needs to take a look. They have some serious concerns that I agree with many of them about when we have special landmarking and we have certain merit items and we have Mills Act items, that I would rather allow them to express an opinion and assist rather than get the finished product and look at them and then everybody wants to modify. It's it's like remodeling after you build a new house. That's kind of hard. So I would make that request. With that, Chester, if you have anything to say on that issue, pro or con, the floor is all yours.
Well, we brought that very point up at the last Planning Commission meeting. We thoroughly believe there needs to be a comprehensive packet given to anyone coming in to seek instructions on any given project. Now, we believe that all that information is there. I mean, it's there in a file somewhere. The question is organization. How do we organize it in that packet that is, that is in a tab format? We recommended a tab format and a binder so it can be supplemented as things change, but it would be comprehensive. So it sounds like a lot of work, but really I think it comes down to funding for staff to have the adequate resources to actually do it, because the information is there. And the information in many cases needs to be modified, but it'll go a large way to reduce frustration, immense frustration amongst people coming in for the permit process. So I think there should be a comprehensive outline that we first should all kind of look at to discuss what should be in the packet itself.
Mm-hmm.
And that way, that input alone would be helpful for staff to kind of focus in on that. Now, I saw the packet that was here today. That's very well done so far. And there are other things I would suggest too. There are many other jurisdictions that have gone through this process before. There are a lot of permit packets out there. And you can just Google that, and you'll find all kinds of great organized formats that you can almost copy. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel either. That's another important point. It's really a matter of organization, funding it through the city council, and getting someone in there to just sit down and put it together. But we thoroughly believe that it's very, very important. So
Thank you.
that's it.
Next week's or next, Steve?
Thank you. A couple of things I would like to suggest. As you put together these checklists, if you would cite the area of municipal code that requires it, or the document that requires it, just so we don't have people say, well, I don't like that rule, and then you have to go find it and cite chapter and verse to them. That would be helpful. Second, if you are looking for some volunteer assistance of people of average intelligence at least, but ignorance of this technical field, to take a look at things as you're going, I would think you could find some volunteers here. I am one. So if
Then-
there's a way to help, I'd love to be able to do that.
And I'm pretty sure the Planning Commission and the HPC will volunteer.
Amen.
For the next meeting, whenever that is to be determined sometime in the future, I heard Councilman Wyrick say he wanted us to talk on that fences, hedges, and walls, especially pursuant to those unsafe intersections. Well, there's an abeyance, but specific to unsafe intersections. And I will contact the Complete Streets to get all of the input, but we want to talk about that. And while we're here, I don't want to, in light of the fact we just got the heaviest rain in July ever, all that did was push back the fires. It didn't stop them. They're here. It didn't do anything for the drought. We have an awful lot of dead brush. We have trees, and we're somehow either, I don't want to say we're not enforcing, because I believe we enforce. Somehow we need some help. We need to give assistance to enforcement where we really can't allow for the accumulation of fire hazards. dead trees that are, 70, 80, 90 feet dead. I mean, no limbs, no, I mean, it was on the front page of the paper about 8, 10 months ago. I mean, these things are ominous. And we got,
Torch waiting to be lit.
yeah, we got tons of dead eucalyptus now, which is fairly rare, but an enormous amount of pines and other trees. And we need some type of ordinance soon. Soon, I mean really soon. I mean emergency, I mean something where we can go down and let people know that they have a limited amount of time. We don't want this stuff here in October and November when we get the sundowners and we get the Santa Ana winds. It just, that's just going to be a bad deal. And then I would like to get into the codes and even cross-pollinate with some of the other codes and with some of the other commissions, and take a look at some of the codes that need to be updated. We have Class C roofs that are allowed in Ojai. I mean, these shingles, these wood shingles are just flying frisbees. And I have looked at the Pasadena, and they came in with a sunset law and says, X amount of years after this date, then you can no longer have them, period. You can't re-roof with them, but you could just, they're coming off. And we need to find some way to make this truly a fire-safe community, and it's not. And we've got the climate, and we've got the topography, and we've got the geography that's really on our side, so we can go ahead. But I would like to see this on the next agenda where we can meet and see if we can't come up with some solutions to take care of some of these problems.
You want to talk fences and hedges and also fire safety.
Fire safety, some type of an emergency, yeah, I want to do that. The fences and hedges, not in regard to the fences and hedges, the fences and hedges in regard to hazardous intersections and hazardous driveways. For years, I was given this urban myth that the reason they didn't allow hedges in front of the property was because they didn't want this place to look like Montecito. I engaged in a conversation about 4 or 5 months ago with Kathleen, and I said, what is the actual rule? She said, Bob, it's safety. You can't see these cars backing out into the road. That is a safety item. And so if it's a safety item, it's really only a safety item for every other house, because you've got the driveway on the other side. And so we can find a way to not chop down every single hedge in town. What we need to do is take those where you're on the right side of the street, where you have vision pulling out, which is not going to interfere with oncoming traffic, which is blind. I can give you 100 different examples of that, but it's getting to be 9, so would we have any other comments from staff? I apologize for the lengthiness of this meeting.
I'd like to inject maybe a positive and hopeful note in all of this. Last week, my wife and I and our son and daughter-in-law and 2 grandchildren were up in the Monterey Bay area. And there's an organization up there called MBARI, the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute, that studies marine life but also monitors temperatures and that kind of thing. And they showed in one of their discussions on Saturday, a graph of water temperatures in the bay. And if those of you that know the Monterey Bay know there's a great big canyon there right in the middle of the bay. You get about 15 miles out and it's 11,000 feet deep. It's deeper than the Grand Canyon by 2. And he was monitoring over a period of years water temperature and other stuff like that. And they have seen a big spike in it this year. The last time they saw a big spike in it was the summer of 2005. And their analysis is that we have a wet winter coming. So let's all keep our fingers crossed, or whatever else we have 2 of.
Thank you much. And then we'll wonder why we're adjourned. Then we're gonna wonder why we didn't go ahead and take all the silt out of these high and dry reservoirs. And we could have tripled the water containment, right?
if you could dredge behind the Matilaha Dam, you'd have some wonderful topsoil.